Okay, so I'd like to call to order this committee of the whole meeting of April 23rd, 2026. At this point in time, I'll put out a declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody would like to express? Seeing no hands go up, we will carry on. Business arising. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carleton.
My apologies for not paying attention. I would like to pull item 6F.
Okay. Right, so I've got the nod from Councillor Carleton that I'll carry on until we get to that agenda item. Okay, good. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing no hands, we will move on to our delegation. We have one delegation this morning that I always look forward to this annual update coming from Kate Burns Gallagher, who will be representing the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, providing us with an update of priorities and achievements and our directions towards the next year. So we welcome you, Ms. Burns Gallagher. It's great to see you. I absolutely love working with you. I'm very pleased to be the chair of the conference committee this year. And I think you're going to have some great news to share with everyone here. So welcome. And if you have any difficulty with the technology, there's lots of help behind you that'll step up and help.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Warden, for the incredibly kind introduction. And through you to County Council, it's a pleasure to be here today to bring an update on the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, our progress on our strategic priorities, and some achievements that we've accomplished in the past year. So let's make sure I can get this going. There we go. So just a quick overview of who we are. So we are the 15 upper and single tier municipalities across Western Ontario. So west of the GTHA, more than 300 communities, 1.6 million residents, and over 250,000 businesses. And we are 90% rural. And that's really the glue that binds our region together, is that rural, small community focus. And although we are 90% rural, we are the economic engine of this province. When we look at manufacturing, agriculture, energy production, tourism, and our supply chain sectors, we are driving the economy of this province. And our strength really is in our collective voice and the collaboration across our 15 members. So what do we do? At our core, the WOWC, or WOWC as we call ourselves, exists to advance our strategic shared initiatives and regional priorities. So we're looking at those priorities that impact all 15 of our counties collectively, but are also unique and niche to Western Ontario. We provide a unified voice to government. I like to say we're the dating service between Western Ontario and the provincial and federal government. And we conduct research and analysis to inform solutions and build partnerships that really expand the capacity of our 15 counties. Our work is always consistent, nonpartisan, and grounded in evidence. So our mission is to advocate with a unified voice. We want to all be singing from that same song sheet, to advance common needs and opportunities through collaboration and evidence-based solutions, ensuring a prosperous and connected future for Western Ontario. The mission is the foundation for everything that we do: our advocacy, our research, our partnership building, and our member support. Our new strategic plan, which was approved last January, so this is our 2025-2027 plan, centers around 4 major goals. The first is being a voice for the region, so that consistent, coordinated advocacy. The second is as an information source, providing members with insights, data, and research. Third is being an asset for our counties, so those shared regional initiatives, tools, and capacity building. And last is being a valued partner to government. We want that proactive engagement that positions the WOWC as a collaborative problem solver. So this structure really provides the caucus for measurable outcomes and sharper advocacy. So looking at those goals, the first one, the voice for the region, and what our strategic priorities are under that. First up, I'm sure no surprise to this group, is that infrastructure, development, and funding. So we are advocating for continued and predictable infrastructure funding, investment in transportation connectivity, recognition of Western Ontario's economic impact to the provincial GDP, and policies that support long-term sustainable asset management. Without adequate infrastructure, we cannot support our population growth, attract investment, or expand the workforce. I know later today you'll be talking about Bill 98 and the Canada-Ontario Partnership Build Fund. And on May 4th, we have a meeting with Minister McCarthy to understand a little bit better about what that fund means for rural Ontario, Western Ontario, for our counties, particularly. How can our counties tap into that funding? So we're going to be asking those hard questions on May 4th of the minister. Our second priority is housing affordability and availability. Our advocacy focus here is securing sustained infrastructure investment. You can't have housing without infrastructure. They're intricately linked to one another. Recognizing the unique rural development models, we are building housing in Western Ontario at a great rate. I have the data and the research that shows in Western Ontario, we are building the housing. And so in order to keep that momentum going, you need the infrastructure investment. Supporting attainable and workforce housing. We know that we need affordable housing as well. It's not just McMansions, but it's affordable housing as well. And encouraging flexible tools that reflect rural realities. So simply put, infrastructure and housing capacity need to be aligned if we expect rural communities to grow. Our third priority is workforce development and preservation. So under this, we're pushing for workforce housing solutions. In order to attract a workforce, we need housing to support those individuals. Training partnerships with colleges, universities, and industry. Broadband and transportation connectivity, making sure that people connect to the internet, and then that transportation to connect them to their workplace. And lastly, policy tools that help employers recruit and retain talent. A strong workforce is the engine that really drives our economic competitiveness. And last but not least, mental health services and support. Many of you may have seen AMO's report at the beginning of the year indicating that homelessness is increasing more quickly at a rapid pace in northern and rural communities. And so we are ensuring that we are advocating for dedicated funding for rural mental health and addiction supports, particularly under the Homelessness Prevention Program funding, expanded wraparound service models, relief from unsupported social service costs. We know those costs are increasing and the burden's coming to the property taxpayer, which is our counties and our municipalities. And long-term sustainable funding rather than crisis response. Let's look at the root cause of the issues and support those root causes. This issue touches every community and requires coordinated provincial and federal leadership. Moving from our priorities into our goals, once again, we want to be that information source. So how have we been doing that? We've been working on key initiatives. We have our workforce development program that was implemented in 2022. We have housing and infrastructure data where we've been working with the Rural Ontario Institute on the Rural Housing and Information System. We also have regional analytic tools, and we have partnerships with post-secondary school institutions, including Western, University of Guelph, University of Waterloo. And we also are pursuing funding with the Trade Impacted Communities program as well. And we're hopeful to hear shortly on a regional project through that initiative. When it comes to being an asset for our counties, we've provided many things. I've mentioned the workforce strategy, those rural housing system research, the trade impacted communities. But what we also do is bring people together. And we are incredibly fortunate that Warren Matrasovs also serves as the chair of our Western Ontario Municipal Conference. This will be our third year in bringing this conference back, and only our second year it was sold out. This conference brings together provincial ministers, folks from across the municipal sector, whether it's elected officials, staff, or stakeholders that are involved with the municipalities. And it's a real opportunity to bring people together to have discussions, and we are very solutions focused. So our program is really about providing solutions to the problems that we're seeing in our municipalities. And last but not least, we also have our Fall Funders Forum, which we'll be excited to be bringing to Grey County this fall, which brings together all of the ministries that have funding programs from Ministry of Tourism to Labor and Immigration to economic development, and it's open to anyone who can tap into those resources. And we've had great success last year. We had over 300 individuals tap into those programs over 6 counties last fall. So one of our other goals there is about being a value partner of government. And how do we do that? We do that through building strong relationships and being consistently at the table, whether it's through ministerial meetings, pre-budget submissions. We were also invited this year. Our chair attended the tabling of the budget for 2026. And we also provided comments in advance and quotes in advance to the Ministry of Finance. We also provide ERO submissions and formal working relationships. We have regular touch-ins at staff, or touch bases, I should say, with staff every other month, both with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Rural Affairs. We also have attended other things such as the Federal Rural Development Roundtable and Federal Building Community Stronger Engagement. And we've also participated in several other events provincially as well. And to note here is that we have our Queen's Park Day coming up on May 4th. So this will be our second Queen's Park Day. And what happens is our executive, so our chair, our vice chair, our secretary, and our treasurer will have a series of meetings. And this year, I'm pleased to say that we will be meeting with the Premier on May 4th and raising some concerns, particularly our focus will be on transit with the Premier this year. And then we will also be meeting with the Minister of Transportation, Rural Affairs, Municipal Affairs and Housing. Who else do we have? We've got a list of about 6, and I'm drawing a blank. I should have written them all down today. However, we have a fulsome day. And then in the evening, we have a reception where we'll be inviting staff, deputy ministers, and MPPs to join us to talk about what's happening in Western Ontario. So it's a really great event. And one of the things we will be talking about is the letter we sent this week to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing on Bill 100. That is the bill talking about regional governance and directly affects Simcoe County, one of our member organizations, with the appointment of a warden. There's an incredible concern about having an appointed warden with strong executive powers within the county structure. So we have sent that letter, and I understand it's been circulated to County Council, and we would gratefully accept support from Grey County for support of that letter. All right, so as we look to 2026 and beyond, our path forward, we really are continuing to advocate with clarity and purpose. We have one touch point a quarter with our provincial partners at Roma, our Queen's Park Day, at AMO, and at our conference. We continue with our regional research with enhancing those post-secondary partnerships. We have data-informed advocacy. We come to the table with that data, with that information. It's not just storytelling or hyperbole. We come to the table with data and being backed by that data. And last but not least, we're advancing solutions and not just asking for support. We're coming to the table with solutions, and that's incredibly important. So thank you so much for your continued leadership and collaboration. The strength of this organization comes from those that sit around the table, and we appreciate Grey County continuing to be a member of the WOWC and being an active partner in the organization as well. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Burns Gallagher. And we will open it to the committee of the whole in case they have questions for you or comments on any of what you've presented in terms of that annual update. And with the issue of your ask about supporting the letter, yes, everyone has had a chance to see it. The clerk has prepared a possible recommended motion. So we'll get to that after everybody's had a chance to ask you questions. So with that, any questions or comments we'll begin with Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Matusoff. Not so much a question, but more of a comment. It is great to see WOWC and AMO and Roma and the arguments and the work being presented to the province unified in that voice, right? Roma and AMO have many of the same priorities in what we're trying to work with the province on, be it infrastructure, housing, mental health issues. And so the more voices that we have as they get compiled upon each other, hopefully we'll break through the armor of the province and get them to make some considerations for what we're talking about. The biggest one in my eyes being that predictable, consistent infrastructure funding for rural Ontario, where the vast land base versus the number of houses that we can property tax funds the whole municipal government. is a big challenge. So I really commend and appreciate the work that WowC is doing. And just want to say thanks.
Thank you. And we do have good representation with the other organizations. As Councillor Nielsen's mentioned, he helps represent Councillor McKay as well with Good Roads, and also Barbara Dobreen, Councillor Dobreen as well. So we do recognize the value of the networking and resonating the voice, making those messages come across and sharing the different perspectives that each organization has, but with the same intent and the same goal in mind. Other questions or comments? Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thanks for the update and the presentation. I know our wardens who have sat on Western Wardens over the last 4 years, 3.5 years, we're not quite to 4 yet, have kept us well informed of the great work that WOWC has been doing. But your comment on the province appointing a warden, that'll be the end of the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, will it not? Because that is a spot that is set for elected officials. I'm just aghast that to think that upper tiers, counties, that the province has this grandiose idea that they'll be appointing. And am I in conspiracy to say, well, pretty soon it'll be just an appointment, and there will be no elected officials that the province will be appointing? How far is this going to go? And our demise in the end of democracy itself on representation of the people? Just a comment. If you want to comment further on it, go ahead, Kate.
Would you like to share any response?
There we go. Thank you, Warren, through you to the counselor. And thank you as well for escorting me in this morning. I appreciated it. So yes, we started off with strong mayor's powers for Toronto and Ottawa, and now we have strong mayor's powers for over 200 municipalities. So that tells you something. You can read the tea leaves there. So this is an appointed warden with strong executive powers in Simcoe County. We have been told by the ministry that this is for regions and they have no intent to expand this beyond the regions. That is what we have been told. So once again, there are tea leaves to be read there as well. Hence why we have written this letter, because we want to ensure that there's consultation. We want to ensure that there is work done ahead of anything else that happens. And we are going to be very strong on this piece of legislation. We are tracking right now when it goes to standing committee so that we can also appear in person in standing committee on this piece of legislation. One of the things that we have discussed is now that it is appointed, it's part of the legislation, but what we would like to see is that the warden is chosen from the elected. So from the existing people that are elected, that warden is appointed from the elected. That's what we would like to see. And so that's some of the advocacy that we're doing as part of the legislative requirements and regulations coming out of this bill. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm just going to also make sure that those who are following along and understanding and the acronym of the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, it wouldn't work the way it does without the participation of our CAOs. So we really do this in partnership. CAO Schertzer and I both attend these meetings together. Then there's an alternate meeting where the CAOs actually get together on their own and continue to further the cause. So, so yes, it's very interesting as we're looking at those appointed, our current elected roles and what it means. One of our own counties is part of that dialogue, and what kind of shape of work we would continue to do. But I do want to make sure that it's understood that it's not just me, it's also CAO Schertzer who steps up and contributes on behalf of County Council. So with that, over to you.
Thank you, Warden. And it's not just the Warden and the CEO. We have members of our senior staff as well, sitting on some of the working groups as part of WowC as well. And so we're definitely, as Kate indicated, very, very much involved with WowC. back to Bill 100, as Kate indicated, the letter from WowC, I think just was released yesterday, I think it was, in terms of timing. And we anticipate that the province will be making a decision on Bill 100 probably in the next few days. We've heard that prior to the potentially the May 1st, which is of course when nominations start opening for municipal elections, is what we were potentially hearing. So hence the timing in terms of trying to bring this forward to council. If there's a desire to again have a motion to support the letter that WowC is put forward, as Councillor Echols indicated, I think the sentiment from the WowC group was that this is the thin edge of the wedge potentially. And so although Kate indicated that the initial discussions are that this will be just applied to regions, we've seen some of that further rollout for other changes. So that's why we're bringing this forward to you, recognizing that the timing is likely tight to if council wanted to lend support to WowC's letter. There is a motion again that the warden has indicated that's been prepared if council is interested in entertaining that.
Thank you. We're going to go to a comment from Councillor Bourdignon.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and echoing Councillor Nielsen's comments in regards to the support for the rural development realities. I was just wondering if there's any more information, like when we talk about infrastructure, capacity, support growth, and funding, in regards to the the lowering of DC charges and the pressures that the municipalities are being put on. Is that part of the priority too? Is it one of the pillars as we move forward as a group?
Wonderful. Thank you, Warren, through you to the councillor. Yes, so we are looking at particularly Bill 98 as well, with the reduction in DCs related to the Canada Ontario Partnership Build. So we have had discussions at our last caucus meeting, and we'll be meeting with our CAOs next Friday to further understand the impacts. And pardon me, we have also brought together our finance directors of finance in the next few weeks to look at the impacts of that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Councillor Kettner.
Thank you, Warden Matrosavs. I think we need to give some consideration to what our response would be if in fact Mr. Ford decides to appoint the chairperson for county councils. I mean to say that we once it's I don't know how you back up or how you stop it once it's out of the bag, sort of thing. And I think that we need a strategy so that if this is what comes forward, our move is X, Y, or Z, because this is the thin edge of the wedge, as has been said, and it is our sort of base democracy. After that's gone, there's not much left, as we've seen south of the border, where it's coming top down, whereas this is working up from the bottom. But it's draconian, and because the point is, we won't even know who the premier appoints. It'll be a friend of his. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so Madam Clerk, if you want to make sure that the recommended motion is on the screen, it has, and the letter has been circulated to council members. Madam Clerk, perhaps you could just share with should this resolution go forward, how will people be able to see the letter, be able to follow what the decision that we're contemplating is today?
Thank you. And through you, due to the timing of the letter, it wasn't able to be included in today's agenda, but we can, for the public's awareness, include it on the agenda for May 14th for information, just to complete the loop.
Thank you. Okay, so the recommended motion is that Grey County Council supports the correspondence from the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus to the province regarding the proposed legislative changes in Bill 100, the Better Regional Governance Act 2026, and that the resolution of support be sent to the MPPs of Grey Bruce Owen Sound and Simcoe Grey and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and that the notice provisions be waived due to the time constraint, as the clerk has mentioned. I see it moved by the Deputy Warden, seconded by Councillor Dobreen. It's now on the floor for discussion. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Dobreen.
Thank you, and through you, Warden, and thank you, Kate, for the great presentation and update, and for the letter. I reflect upon the fact that the province created lower municipalities to deliver the services and infrastructure and government on behalf of the province. And it just seems that the province right now is chipping away at that foundation. So I'm happy to second the motion. May the 4th be with you on at your meeting, and hopefully we can show our support in time. I was wondering if we could also include Roma in the circulation, and Minister Thompson, Minister of Rural Affairs.
Okay, Madam Clerk, it's been moved and seconded, but is that just, can I consider that just a non-substantive change just to add to the list? I think we've done that before where we've added to the list of circulation. Okay, so unless there's any opposition to Roma as well as to Minister Thompson, I am not seeing any opposition, so we will make sure that that's added. And anything else? No, I don't see any further comments and any hands raised, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Excellent, and I can see that that was unanimous. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Burns Gallagher. I hope you might be able to stay long enough for the break so that informally members of our council can have a chance to chat with you, because you have driven a long way and we appreciate you coming up for that. And I know that you and I are going to be in the throes of doing things together over the next month. So I look forward to seeing you again, but this is an opportunity for you to engage with our other county councillor members. Okay, so with that, then we will go to the determination of items for separate discussion. Councillor Carlton?
Thank you. So I am wearing a pin today that says it's okay not to be okay. Apparently it's fitting today. I would like to pull item 6F.
Thank you. Item 6F. Any other items on the consent agenda? Looking around the room and online. Okay, I'm not seeing any further. So the recommended motion is that staff be authorized to take action. Oh, sorry, that the following consent items. Ugh, we're all having a day. It was a long drive back from Bruce Power yesterday. That the following consent agenda items be received, and that staff be authorized to take the actions necessary to give effect to the recommendations in the staff reports, and that the correspondence be supported or received for information as recommended in the consent agenda. We have pulled just the one item. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Got it moved by Councillor Keaveney, seconded by Councillor Nielsen. Any discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. So we'll return to item 6F. With committee of the whole's permission a little earlier than we usually do, because we'd like to be able to tidy that up before we go into closed session. So we'll bring it up a little bit further into the agenda than usual. And we are at 10 to 11. So let's keep going through let's see what we can cover before our break. If we could look at item 7A, then we are now on the items for direction and discussion. And the first one is the Joint Municipal Services minutes that were dated from April 16th, 2026. And we will have the Manager of Communications, Rob Hatton, will be ready to elaborate further on the examples of the platform. So that will be coming, but let's look at getting this motion on the floor first. It's recommended that the Joint Municipal Services Committee meeting minutes dated April 16th, 2026 be adopted as presented and the following resolutions contained therein be endorsed. There are 4 of them that are listed that have been provided and published within our agenda. So with that, I will look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Body, seconded by Councillor Dickert. It's now on the floor for discussion. So welcome, Manager Hatton.
Thank you very much, Madam Warden, and good morning, County Council. Last week, the Joint Municipal Services Committee met, and there was only one item on the agenda, and that was the single source purchase of a digital engagement platform. And the one that we were looking at is Social Point. To begin that discussion, I gave an overview of our report, which highlighted the benefits of online digital engagement, how that can improve public participation, how it makes engagement more accessible, as well as more equitable for those who maybe can't participate in the more traditional ways that we tend to engage. I did provide some rationale for how we got to where we are, which was looking at the Social Point platform. Over the course of 2025, we had a lot of meetings with local member municipalities to discuss this concept of a digital engagement hub that would be a kind of one window place for residents of Grey County to engage with both their local municipality as well as the upper tier, the county municipality, on one platform where they would only need one login should they choose to even create an account. They could access the different projects and initiatives that are relevant and interesting to them. At the meeting, we did have Mike McInerney from Social Point there in person to do the demonstration with us. Mike's been a really great resource. He just actually lives nearby right here in the city of Owen Sound. So it was great that we could have him in person because he does have a very large territory covering most of North America, actually. Mike showed off the platform's capabilities and went over a lot of examples of the tools. I'm going to try to show some of those highlights today, but I don't have access to all of the back end portions of it to show you this morning. So I will just try to keep with some relevant local examples to go over with you. And I don't have nearly as many tabs open as Mike had. I think he had about 150, I think, when he was going through his examples. So if it's all right with you, Madam Warden, I'll just direct Council's attention up to the screen. And what we have here is an example of, move this over, is an example of a regional hub. So this is the Engage Waterloo landing page. So for residents of the Waterloo region, this is the place that they would go, and this is how they can access engagement for all of the local municipalities. So you can see the Waterloo region itself is the first one there, but we also have Cambridge, Kitchener, Wellesley, City of Waterloo, Wilmot, and Woolwich that are on there. So this is the hub site that can allow the residents to navigate around. Each municipality does have full control over what is on their site, and that includes kind of the look, feel, and branding. So if I click on the Engage Cambridge site here, you'll see that it's using their branding colors, and by default, we just have their projects listed here. And if you were go back to the main hub page and you click on City of Kitchener, for example, you do see that while the layout is somewhat similar, it's got their own unique branding so that each municipality can maintain their own look and feel, and they control the projects that are available for their specific sites. So just to show you an example of some projects. So if we are on the main hub page, let's say that you're interested in a specific topic. So you can click into the categories, take a look at the examples that are here. Let's go with health and well-being. And you can do a search, just give it a moment when it's going through all the sites. It takes a little bit of a while time to do that. So we're doing, oh, sorry, I did all places, but if I'll change that to all places. So if you're just interested in health and well-being, you can search across all opportunities within the region, or in our case, it would be across the county. So you have different projects here. We click on one of them, you can see a bit of how a project page can be laid out. There's a lot of flexibility for what we can do with these, but you can generally have a summary of the project itself, the important links, frequently asked questions. On this particular engagement, the way that they are getting feedback from the public is just two simple contact boxes here to make it easy. You can see information about the dates when these topics were being discussed. And I really like the way that they allow you to embed different widgets on the page to really any relevant media you can block right into the page to make the page a little bit more exciting for people that are going there, but they don't have to click off and go to YouTube to watch a recording of a public meeting or an information session. You can have all of that right in one place. Just to scroll down a little bit further here, they also have this the ability to set up a who's listening section. So this lets the public know specifically who is leading the project and how they can directly reach out to them if they have specific questions that aren't being answered on the platform as well. So that's one example. If we go back, let's instead this time do a search by all categories. Now I'm actually more interested in what's in my community. So let's say we're in Kitchener here, all categories, and Vision Zero. We'll click on that one here. So this is another project page. You can see right away that this one's set up a little bit differently, how they've blocked it out. So they have their PSA videos right up here at the top that support the campaign. They have the life cycle or project timeline along the right-hand side of the page, which quickly shows anyone that's checking in on this project where they are in this phase. And then towards the bottom, they have the various ways that you can engage with this one. So they have updates, which is just news about the project. Surveys, these are currently closed, but this is where any built-in survey right on the site would be added. And then they have something that's pretty interesting here, and this is an example of what the ideas dashboard is. So this allows the public to submit their own comments and ideas right on the project page. So this is something that can really supplement and enhance kind of the conversations that I think we're trying to steer away from our social media environments like Facebook, where the conversations tend to not be so healthy anymore. And we can have them on here on the platform. The Social Point platform, it is AI moderated, but it also is for like some of the obvious like obscenities that you would expect not to appear on a government website. But it also has 24/7 live human moderation. So when something gets submitted, it goes quickly through a review process to make sure that it is appropriate. And that would also mean being relevant to the topic that's on here. We don't need these turning into a Kijiji page on one of our projects. So then maybe I'll just show one more on the region site here. So what maybe a smaller municipality might look like. So if we were to look at Woolwich, all right, wastewater treatment plant, let's go. So they're using it to provide some just more informational details, it looks like, on this project. They're having a summary of the project. They're including the public meeting. Again, they're using the life cycle to let people know where they are in the process. And then they have the comment section and a Q&A. So they are using the survey feature right now. Pops up. It's very easy to use. It's fully accessible. The entire site exceeds the web accessibility standards that we are required to meet as municipalities. And you can see that you can build and customize in your surveys here. And there is some logic in the surveys. So if to prevent people from submitting without responses, those types of examples. So everything that I've shown you so far, I've done as a member of the public that was not interested in providing my personal information to register an account. The second site I'm going to show you might look a little familiar to some of you. It's the Connect Grey Highlands website. So Grey Highlands is currently a member of of the Social Point platform. So I just thought I would show you their site here. And what I'm going to do is show you what the experience looks like for someone who does choose to register for the platform. So if you log in, it doesn't change anything right off the bat here, but we look at I went into the zoning project here, so you can see how they have everything blocked out. But a couple of features that I just wanted to focus on here was the sharing. So for any resident that comes to this page that thinks, hey, I want to tell my neighbors about this, I want to tell other folks about this, it's really easy for them to share the materials out either to social media or by email. It's also going to be nice for my team and your communications teams to use a platform like this, because you can build your page and then you don't need to redo all the work to put it on the social platforms, because we do still need to tell people about the engagements. But if you click the share link, it's going to automatically post across, and you can put your own summary in there, but it's going to make that very easy to help spread the word about the open engagements. The other piece I wanted to show you was the ability to follow projects. So if someone is very interested in one very specific project, they can essentially sign up for updates. It's very easy. When they're logged in, they just click follow the project. This will send them an email that says you're now following the project. Anytime that this project page gets updated, if a new report gets added to it, if they add an additional engagement opportunity, a very simple email is going to notify the individual that they can go back to the page to see the new updates. And each individual will have their own profile. And like I said, they would only need one for both the local municipal level and the county level. And this would allow them to change what projects they want to follow. And they can also set their interests. So those categories that I showed you on the initial pages, they can subscribe for updates when new projects are added within those categories, or they can select which municipalities they're interested in getting updates for. And then again, that'll send those email notifications to them to let them know. And we do know that email is effective. When we did our communication strategy a few years ago, that was the number one way that residents do still want to hear from their local government at that time. So that was the main things that I did want to go over in the demonstration here. There are several other tools available that I didn't touch on outside of the scope of projects. Like I said, you can use it to display news. You can set up forums to talk about specific topics. You can have Q&As. There's built-in tools to support the municipal budgeting process that a lot of clients do like to use. That's something that your municipality or the county may want to consider doing as well. But that is the very, very high-level overview. But I would certainly be open to answering any questions if anyone has them.
Okay, thank you very much. An excellent local example from Grey Highlands. So thank you for sharing both. With that, any questions from committee of the whole members or comments? We'll begin with the deputy warden, then we'll go to Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you, Rob, for the overview of the program. So I guess my question is, and it looks very encompassing, very informative, very easy to use. Why or how is this different than social media, the web page, any other normal way of communicating with the community? Is this just another addition, or is this instead of something? Because I see a lot of work here for a staff member to keep this updated and fluid. Can you help me with some of that, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. So it is a bit of a combination. So it is it's not going to replace our municipal websites. It's certainly going to complement what we already have. And it's going to complement our existing engagement practices that we do. Public meetings aren't going to go away. We know we're required to have those, and we do know that they are effective for some topics, and they have their place. But these tools will really give us ways to get more information out of the public. We can get more details from a wider subsection of people who do want to engage with us, who maybe some of those people don't want to be on social media, but they will use a platform like this. Maybe some people are on social media, but they're hesitant to engage on pages just because of some of the potential risk that comes with that because of the behavior of other community members. So I think that that's very important. What I see as the biggest benefit of a platform like this is that we're really going to hear from a more diverse audience than what we tend to hear from right now. Because when we have meetings set up the way that we do, we're usually hearing from the same few groups and demographics that are able to participate at those times. Our candidate information session last night from 6 to 9, well, that's a bad example. That's a different thing. But if we have an information session from 6 to 9, that's probably not going to work for a lot of parents who have young kids that they got to feed, they got to get them to bed. It's not going to work for a shift worker that's going in for an overnight at the hospital. This is going to allow those people who maybe don't currently have a voice currently to engage on the topics that we have. As far as more work for our team, I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot. There will be some. What we're told from in my conversations with Mike, with Social Point, and what I hear from my colleagues across Ontario that I reached out to get some feedback from, were a little bit different. It does require some investment of time, but it is very much worth it because they've all seen a large increase in public participation when they move to this platform. And that includes those who didn't have a platform initially or those who have migrated over from another service. They did see an increase as well in Social Point.
Okay, and I think you can add to, not only is it an alternative that a user may consider a safer place to be because there are negative interactions on other social media platforms, but also for the accuracy of information, because it's so easy these days to put things up on Facebook and make it sound like it's official. And if you want to go right to the source, this will be the source. Okay, so we're going to go over to Councillor Keaveney, and then I see Councillor Nielsen's hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and good morning, everyone. And I just wanted to add, as a member of the Shared Services Committee, that we really had a thorough discussion about this at that session and a very thorough presentation from Mike. And I really like this for a lot of reasons, because it is almost a one-stop shop for information, and has been said, but can't be emphasized enough, the positivity of this site and getting away from the negativity of Facebook. And a lot of people are stepping away these days from social media. So now there would be a site where they could go to get information and to participate. And I think it's easy for users, and I really like that. In a community with a lot of seniors, it looks like it's very easy for people to use, and it covers everything from the projects that we've talked about to community calendars. We didn't look at that section, but there's a lot of information in there about communities. But what I think I was particularly impressed with that came near the end of the presentation was the accessibility features. And I don't know, Rob, if you're able to show any of those to council, but I was just really pleased to see how comprehensive those features were. So I think this really is an all-encompassing site that is a great addition to our current websites and can be easily accessed from a website homepage, and that will really be well received, I think, by our residents. Thank you.
Through you, Warden, I don't have accessibility features up on the two sites that I did have open here. But certainly I do agree with you. There was a lot in there that goes above and beyond just the contrast and font sizes that you would typically see as like a basic tool. They had built-in tools to support users with dyslexia and a whole lot of other features. So it certainly was something that I think will, again, just improve the overall accessibility of how we engage with our public.
Okay, and is there a feature where you can highlight text and hear it read out? as well? Is that part of the suite of offerings?
Yes, that is included in there. Yeah.
Okay, over to Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Matrosoff. Just kind of, I wanted to take a chance to respond to Councillor Milne, if I may. I think one of the fantastic points of this is when we have, like, respectfully, residents' interests are self-interests, right? So if they have something that they're interested in, they will reach out and try to do the research to find it. The zoning bylaw that's going on through Grey Hounds right now that was showcased just here by Rob shows that that's a project that affects a lot of different residents. We send 2,000 letters out. So there's many residents that are now being flocked to the Connect Grey Highlands page because that's where we're giving them the directions. Once they're there, they're seeing the sweep of other things that exist. And I think that that's going to have a rebounding effect as it goes forward when other projects get up. Or coming and seeing the zoning bylaw allows them to see, oh, I didn't realize Grey Highlands was also doing X or Y. And suddenly they're getting that information. Whereas scrolling down the plethora of Facebook posts trying to find that one municipal post that was about something they noticed, or a comment that gets made on a Facebook page that creates either false information to what Warden Matrosoff spoke to, or trying to direct somebody to the right information. There does give a sense of factual evidence and building upon their interest base. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing in Grey Highlands, is that more community members are kind of commenting to me in the last few months about the Connect Grey Highlands because of that ability to, they've gone there for a specific reason, and now they're seeing that there's a lot more there than they thought was available in Grey Highlands.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Gray.
Thank you very much for the overview. I just have one question, Rob. If I flip back to the report provided to the committee, just have to find the line. There was 2 alternatives noted, and I just was unclear in the recommendation as to what one was being pursued. It was let's see, the recommendation. There was an additional option that the county pursue it all at this time on behalf of the lower tier municipalities. Or the previous it was noted in the paragraph that it was a recommendation to move forward, but it would be more challenging for lower tier municipalities to come on board maybe in the future. What direction was it? Because I just was not clear in the minutes there what we were doing.
Through you, Warden. So at this time, the recommendation is to move forward with the platform for the county, and then to have the municipalities work towards coming on board as it works for them to make that transition.
Okay, thank you. So I think I found it. Given this challenge, it would be recommended that Grey County move forward with Social Point initially with the intention of building towards a regional platform over time as more municipal partners choose to purchase the platform. That's what we're, okay. If you could, I'm always hesitant to spend money mid-year from reserves. I see the one-time funding reserve as a slush fund. Sometimes this is the general reserve. Could there just be comment about what's the balance in the general reserve at this time? What's it about? Because it's not in the report in terms of some context to the general reserve. If you could just provide that as well, thanks.
We're just going to wait a moment to hear from Director Spicer.
And if I could, Madam Chair, I just would note while we're waiting for that answer, one thing that did strike me is two things in this report. We, as a council, in the line item or departmentally, we ran a $30,700 deficit, I think, during the year 2025. This committee had just the one report. It took about an hour, and I'm just wondering, strategically, maybe as a corporation, if our committees might incorporate more material I'm just noting that at the same time, I'm reading that we ran a deficit of $30,000 as a council here, inclusive of all their meetings and activities. So that jumped out at me as well.
Through you, Madam Warden, at the end of 2025, the one-time funding reserve had a balance of $6.9 million in it.
The report notes this is the general reserve, though. Just wondering about some context of the general reserve.
That's a typo in the report. It should say the one-time funding reserve. When we discussed this as part of budget deliberations, in the communications budget, social pinpoint was recommended in the budget and it was going to be funded from the one-time funding reserve. So that's why the report actually recommends that we do what we said we would have done if we had passed this during the budget process. It's just a typo in the report.
Okay, thank you. That's noted. We'll go to Councillor Delbreen.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you, Rob. Originally, I believe it was a $60,000 estimate, and in the minutes, it shows 36,500. Is that because it's mid-year? What is the annual cost to the county in order to have this platform? And if the lower tier municipalities wish to come on, what would be the cost to each of them to piggyback onto the county?
Through you, Warden. So the annual cost would be the 36,500. So that would be the annual renewal. It would just come due at whatever point in the year it is that we were to be getting on board. The cost to each local municipality does range. These platforms, they bill based on size of population. But we do know from our previous quotes that we would be seeing a reduction in those initial prices of upwards to 15% as more municipalities come on. That's kind of the carrot on the stick, I guess, that they're offering. The specific pricing for municipalities, it ranged when I did have that quote anywhere from, I think, 8,000 for the smaller municipalities up to I wish I had it in front of me, but I think it was about 13,500 for the city being the largest municipality.
Thank you for that. And just a follow up then, since our neighbor Grey Highlands is already on the platform, what benefit would they be? Would they receive any benefit to coming in under the county? I'm not even sure if that is a possibility, or if another municipality has decided to proceed with another platform, migrating over at some point.
Through you, Warden. So these are some of the conversations that did already happen last year in some meetings with the CAOs, as well as the local municipal staff, about how we would get to a digital engagement hub, knowing that we do have a couple of municipalities who are using a different platform. And like you said, we have Grey Highlands who is using this one. And what we would need to do is have, I think, just a bit of a project group that involves the staff from the interested municipalities so that we could have a plan for what our vision of the hub site looks like, so that we could, as we individually build our sites now, that they're ready to go when we do want to connect those pieces in a couple of years or next year, whenever that comes to be. It'll have to get discussed at the local level.
Okay, thank you. With that, I don't see any further hands. We do have the motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. The clerk has adjusted the accuracy of the third statement that reads now that the purchase be funded from the one-time funding reserve and the annual renewal be included in the 2027 communications operations budget. Okay, so with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that motion is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so at this point in time, we are going to call our break, and before we come back, carry on business until 12:30 lunch. So, Madam Clerk, if we're back at 11:30? Okay, so we'll call a break until 11:30. Thank you very much.
There we go. Thanks, guys. There we go.
If I can just please invite our committee, of the whole members back and our staff back to their seats. Over there. I'm just gonna say glasses go. Okay, we're good to go from the break. Yes, excellent. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are now at item 7B, and it's recommended that PDR CW 1726 regarding the University of Guelph student project entitled Best Practices in Rural Event Venues be received, and that staff be directed to use the student report as a resource to inform future planning policy recommendations, and that the student report be shared with member municipalities across Grey County. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Got it moved by Councillor Nielsen and seconded by Councillor Pringle. It's now on the floor for discussion. So with that, I would like to invite Intermediate Planner Cassandra Dillman to come and introduce the students and the project.
Perfect. Thank you. Just wanted to get that slideshow up there for them. Okay, so we're here, as you mentioned, as a follow-up to a project that I mentioned earlier this year in February. So planning staff partnered with a team of students at the University of Guelph. They're completing their master's in rural planning to help us with a project called Best Practices in Rural Event Venues. So it's an issue that continues to generate interest across the county, and we do get a lot of inquiries. So this work was not intended to revisit that question of whether or not rural event venues should be permitted. Instead, the students looked at how they can be regulated effectively and consistently. And a key goal of this work is to take on some of that in-depth research that goes into creating policy. So it's been a pleasure working with this team since January, and I'm pleased to introduce these three students, Nagin, Ashley, and Bailey, and they will be here to present their findings and their report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra, for the introduction, and good morning, Council Committee. To briefly introduce our project, we focus on rural event venues in Grey County, such as wedding venues and agritourism spaces. The purpose of this project was to understand how these uses are currently being regulated, identify any gaps or challenges, and develop practical recommendations to improve the policy framework moving forward. We approach this by looking at other municipalities, analyzing case studies, identifying key issues, and building recommendation based on those findings.
Okay, so as part of our research, we looked at Haldimand County as well as Essa townships. With that said, a lot of them across Ontario are all very similar in their approaches. So event venues are not permitted as of right. They all require a site-specific zoning amendment. Other than how like home operations and spaces that would accommodate farm uses. But it must be demonstrated that is low impact and is compatible with the agricultural surroundings. And they must be able to demonstrate that there's balances between economic diversification and that it doesn't negatively affect the agricultural land that we so very much cherish in these areas.
So this case study looks at Ivy Ridge wedding venues in Essa Township, which is a good example of a well-functioning rural event venue. The venue operates under site-specific zoning bylaw amendments since these types of uses are not permitted as of right. What's important here is the scale is clearly controlled. There are limits on the number of guests and parking, and overnight accommodations are not permitted. The location also plays a key role. It is situated within a rural event cluster and surrounded by agricultural uses, which helps minimize conflicts with nearby properties. Overall, this example shows how clear regulations combined with appropriate location will allow rural event venues to operate successfully while remaining compatible with surrounding uses. In contrast, our next case study, the Post and Beam in Teeswater, highlights some of the challenges that can arise with rural event venues. Although it also operates under a site-specific zoning amendment, it is located within a rural residential area with nearby homes, which creates compatibility concerns. There are operational limits in place, such as restriction on guest numbers and hours of operation. However, the business has expanded over time to include accommodations and additional services on their bed and breakfast operation. So at this point, it's not really clear if what's happening on site lines up with what was originally approved. And overall, this shows how these type of issues can come up when things are clearly set up from the beginning.
Okay, so we'll jump to key issues and challenges that we have seen from the various case studies, because we did also look at some within the area. So we looked at Spy Cidery as well as the Highland Estates projects. So we've pulled out some key issues and challenges from these projects. So what we found was that clear definitions are required to dictate what a rural event space is and what parameters they can operate in. So very clearly stating what is permitted and what is not permitted, which includes the small versus large. So what would constitute a small venue, what would constitute a large venue, and how would those differ, and what the regulations would be for either. Clear thresholds. So our bed and breakfasts are permitted. Can you have accommodations? How many cars can you have on site? Those type of ideas. Land use compatibility. So talking about which areas would be ideal for rural event spaces, what areas would not be. So obviously within a well-built housing community, probably doing a rural event space would not be ideal. But out where it's more rural, less neighbors, it could be considered there. Ancillary uses. So having other things implemented into it. So having like a brewery, or are you going to do wedding? Are you going to do family reunions? Those types of things. So putting in those guidelines of how else that space can be used. Site servicing always becomes an issue. Does the site have the capacity for the venue that they're proposing? Will septic have to be increased? Do they have sufficient water? Will they have to bring in porta potties? Those types of things need to be very clearly defined. Obviously, protection of prime agriculture is very important. We don't want to lose any farmland to rural event spaces that won't contribute back to our food sources. So making sure that it is clear in what municipalities, what areas are not going to be permitted based on the soil conditions in that area. And then the planning structure. So given that Grey County is the upper tier, and then there's the member communities, each community is going to be slightly different because you're all are kind of unique in what you offer. So just taking that into account, that every member community will not be a copy and paste of each other. And then always enforcement. Enforcement becomes the challenging part. We know businesses grow. That's a natural progression. So how do you manage that when businesses start to want to add bed and breakfasts? Do you plan for worst case scenario? They start small and they can build up to what they envision as their dream? Or do you plan for what they want to do today, and then handle each growth as a different application. So with that said, I will pass it to Bailey to talk about the recommendations.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. So now we'll take a look at our report's recommendations. So I broke it down into our recommendations for the county official plan, the local official plans, and the local zoning bylaws. At the county official plan level, we have recommended that rural event venues should be permitted within rural and agricultural lands as either an on-farm diversified use or as a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment with supporting studies, depending on the extent of the proposal. The county should also maintain definitions for what a rural event venue is and what a rural event cluster is. In the county official plan, there is already a list of technical and supporting studies, but this list could be standardized into a required and supplementary list specifically geared to these rural event venues. Lastly, the county OP should require that all local municipalities adopt policies and procedures for dealing with rural event venues. At the local official plan level, we recommended carrying forward the language that requires all rural event venues to proceed through the site-specific zoning bylaw amendment process. We also invite municipalities to consider what type of venues are ideal for their locality. This can be related to size, scale, intensity, servicing requirements, set forward. Again, at this point, it's important to consider that definitions and processes are clear and frequently updated to match the progressing industry. At the zoning bylaw level, we recommended that rural event venues, again, are not permitted as of right within any land use designations, but that they should proceed through that site-specific zoning bylaw amendment. So looking at the amendment itself, so at the local official, we've provided a list of recommendations to consider including within the site-specific zoning bylaw amendment for any given proposal. So this list should include the type of rural event venue, including a definition if it doesn't already fit into the predefined definitions. The portion of the property that will be used as part of this rural event venue, because sometimes on larger parcels, it's not the entire area. The type of events and the maximum number of events that should be held each year, as well as the maximum number of occupants at each event. This site-specific zoning bylaw amendment should also include whether the event space will be utilizing other as-of-right zoning permissions. So in many cases, this is usually the bed and breakfast or hotel provisions, and it should outline a specification on the number of rooms present and where they are located within the property. Additional studies that will be required before lifting a holding provision. So this is anything from our required or supplementary list, which may include noise assessments or traffic impact assessment should also be considered at this stage. And if you've not already had a chance to review our report, it is available online as attached to the agenda. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for supporting us with this project, including Cassandra, Becky, Deekshaw, and the rest of the county staff.
Okay, hold on. We can only do one microphone at a time. So at this point in time, I will open it to the committee of the whole members that wish to ask questions. Thank you very much. And it was an interesting read. I appreciate you submitting it to us so that we can contemplate it. And I was able to read it with both my hat as the mayor of the Blue Mountains as well as my warden hat on to look at the different perspectives that you considered. So I thought you looked for the right kind of information to put into one particular report and give us those recommendations that you have. So with that then, I'll put it out to committee of the whole members if they have any questions. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Matrosoff. I had a chance during the break to talk to the students and really did appreciate the information they brought forward. Something that I didn't want to have you leave without a question. So a lot of the recommendations in here suggest utilizing site-specific and specific zoning applications in order to move forward with these kind of projects. I do appreciate the report suggesting that as of right, maybe a bit of a challenge in terms of understanding, because the broad spectrum of what event spaces could be, from small micro 15, 20 people gatherings to larger spaces that might have 100+ people for a wedding. But my question for you is there limitations that the municipalities or the county can put into a site-specific zoning application that might leave windows for, challenges with enforcement and such? I mean, you have number of people attending, number of times a unit is happening, but when it comes to noise, are we allowed to, within a zoning application, specify decibel levels of noise? Are we allowed to be that specific, or is there limitations within that?
Here comes Planner Dillman is going to support you in that answer. So
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that's really a challenge in most zoning bylaws. I think some of that more specific, you were looking at maybe noise. Some of that can be addressed through a site plan control agreement as well. So a noise study might identify that a building should be enclosed and that it should have air conditioning and that it should have certain types of mitigation measures for the number of people that are inside of it. And then you might sort of take some of that and put it and embed it into the site plan control agreement so that you can be a little bit more specific. Within the zoning bylaw itself, it can be challenging to go beyond the things where that building is located on the property, those setbacks, what the definition is. It can be a little bit hard to go beyond that within the zoning bylaw itself.
okay, we'll go to Councillor McQueen.
Well, just thank you, and thanks for your presentation. Just to follow up on that, I don't know if you've used Grey Highlands as some of your test pilot things, because there's been a few items that have popped up in Grey Highlands. Sorry, but I guess one of the points is trying to find that balance and saturation of event spaces, because, I know that even we have our Airbnb license, so we have a certain saturation level that we try not to go past. But I think the balancing part of that is also the municipality has rental spaces as well. And you start to create all these other sites that takes away from your sites. So it's trying to find that balance. And I think the other thing is Deputy Mayor Nielsen said that, noise is a big one. Noise at 11 o'clock at night is even a bigger one. And all that kind of stuff. And carrying on that, we find that a little bit with Airbnbs as well. So I think there has to be a bit of a balance, and I think the size of the property as well. Where it's tight, proximity to other residents in a residential area, traffic sometimes coming, parking, all those different things. But again, the bottom line is where's the balance it takes away from your municipal rented spaces as well. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Director Taylor has a comment.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you to Council for your questions and to the student team for this wonderful report. I'd just like to say that the student team was asked to focus on some of our planning tools. But as municipalities, you do have other bylaws and permitting processes that can augment your planning tools. So many of our municipalities would have a noise bylaw that can speak to specifics and hours of noise in your municipality, and you might have an exemption process under your noise bylaw. And some municipalities also implement special permit licensing in that regard. And so the planning tools, the zoning and the site plan, and not to lead into our Bill 98 later, are evolving. But there's lots of other tools in our toolkit that collectively we as counties and municipalities can use to make sure these event spaces don't have undue impact on neighborhoods or the community.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Taylor. We're going to go over now to the Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you, ladies, for the report. Go Griffins. I struggle sometimes with the thought that, we want to create these venues out in the rural areas. Rural Ontario is not Disneyland. Although I know a lot of people from the GTA think there's nothing out here but trees and rocks. People work out here, they live out here. This is our home. There are multitudes of facilities in our rural communities, urban communities now. There's Legions, there's Lions Clubs, there's Optimus Halls, there's community facilities that we as a community own, arenas and different places like that. In my mind, you're encouraging conflict out in the rural areas if you encourage these venues because of noise, light, traffic, you name it. There's all kinds of impacts on rural agriculture, I'm thinking mainly. So I appreciate the report, and I think you touched on all the good points that need to be considered. And if we're really serious and we consider those points truthfully, we want no part of this. At least I don't. So I'm just saying, thank you very much again for your efforts, ladies.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Dobreen.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you very much. I did read it with great interest, and to the Deputy Warden's point, great concern as well. Our halls and all of those are struggling at the same time. But, I live in the rural area, and I know that our farmers and our dairy farmers specifically, they're, unless they're robotic, they're up at 5 a.m. and if we allow them and we regulate them, which is great, we also create the enforcement issue. When we have limited enforcement bylaw staffing, it's complaint-based. How do we manage the enforcement aspect when, facilities get approved and then, they're approved for 100 people, but then 105 show up, and it wasn't complained about, and then, we'll allow 110, and it gets to a point where it gets out of hand, and then there's a complaint, and then you have to try and pull it all back. So I have to echo the concerns, and certainly to pursue that on an individual case-by-case basis. I appreciate that it's not as of right. And we have to look at all those studies that correspond to it. I'm not sure how to get into the weeds, or I'm certainly not going to today, but we'll be exploring it and more, and this report will be most helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Just before we go over to staff, yes, and some excellent feedback, because that is what I hope is the next stage of your project, is to receive feedback and think about, what might be another area to explore, etc. But also remembering that this is a student report. This is this is not a staff report. We're not actually deciding on doing any changes. We're going to take it into consideration and use it as a layer of research that requires. Certainly, one of the key layers to me is that planners, as you embark into your careers, is if you haven't lived rural, then you need to connect to people that have lived rural, because the Class 6 gravel road that I live on, it's not meant to accommodate more traffic. So if all of a sudden somebody down the road were to start that up, we'd had an issue on a regular basis. The other thing that I've noticed over the 25 years of living rurally too is it's not just noise, it's the way that noise travels in a rural environment. It's incredibly different than in an urban situation. So all those kind of things, like, yay that you're at University of Guelph, because you're surrounded by people that are embrace the rural aspect, which is why you're so interested in the programs that you're in. So with that, we have a staff comment from Becky over there. Thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone. And I just wanted to comment, just as a reminder of the planning framework that we're working with at Grey County. So currently these types of uses are permitted within our official plan, but only to the scale that is permitted for on-farm diversified uses. So that's basically 2% of the size of the property, up to 8,000 square meters. So basically you would max out with a 40-hectare size property up to 8,000 square meters. And so that is less than a hectare, assuming it's a 40-hectare size property. And so that includes all of the parking, all of the servicing, any of the buildings, all of those types of uses would have to be on that very small footprint of an area. So our policies already right now are quite limited, and those were brought about kind of as a way to balance the number of requests that we're receiving, those opportunities for farmers who are actively farming to diversify their own economic opportunities, if those are the types of uses that they're looking to add to their property. And oftentimes, in the case of Spy Cidery, those are making use of the actual outputs from the farm and integrating those within that event facility as well. So I just wanted to speak to, we really do have quite a limited framework already. And so the assumption is anything above and beyond that OFDU framework would still require that additional county official plan amendment. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Okay, now we do have, we'll go back over to Councillor McQueen. We do have a hefty agenda today. So, and I'm also, having been an adult educator, I can anticipate that they're probably looking to relax. So after this moment of coming and looking at 18 mayors and deputy mayors around the table. So with that, we'll go for a concluding comment from Councillor McQueen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Warden, for allowing me. Yeah, I think off-farm diversity uses has a certain place, but it's also for the respect of the rural lands and the farmlands and not standing in a canola field trying to get your picture taken and all that stuff. And the last comment is most times you're having a get together, invite your neighbors. It goes a lot better.
Absolutely. Okay. So with that, we thank you for using your educational experience as an opportunity to be able to explore something that is very relevant to us, and by using actual Grey County examples, that has been very useful to us. We do appreciate that. And my thanks to Planner Dillman and all of the staff members that were mentioned in your thanks for supporting them on this educational journey. So with that, relax. Okay, so we will move on then to item 7C. And, oh, sorry. That's right. I forgot this was not a delegation, so we actually do have a motion that's on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. I'll ask a question now. All those in favor? All right, that motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 7C, it's recommended that the council receive FRCW 0726 entitled the 2025 year-end transfers and approve the recommendations as contained and estimated in the report, and that council approve any surplus deficit arising in the 2025 budget being transferred to from the respective department reserve, and that remaining unfunded capital costs as of December 31st, 2025 for the administrative building renovation, Chatsworth Paramedic Base and Grey Gables roof be funded by an unbudgeted transfer from the one-time funding reserve of $4,144,174 to further to the resolution CW 18725. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Dickert. Welcome, Manager Reid.
Thank you. And through the warden, before I get into the report, I just want to acknowledge the amount of work that goes into getting this report ready. This report and our annual audit are kind of our final steps to tying out our financials for the calendar year. Just to give council an idea of the scale of our accounting system, I have to run 4 separate PDFs to create a general ledger, which is a statement of all of our transactions that we send to our auditors, because it's too big to go into one PDF. It ends up being about 5,000 pages. Our accounting system is made up of about 5,200 different accounts that all have to be reviewed and reconciled before they go to the auditors. Now, some of those are quick and easy to check and balance, but some of them, such as grant accounts, can take hours for a single account. So I just want to thank the analyst team, the officers, the accounting clerks, and senior management for all their work in reviewing the financial statements, making sure that it's a final and clear picture that's being presented to you today and that's been provided to our auditors. And just as an update to council, our auditors started on site last week. Things are going along quite well. They're currently off site, as some things are just easier to test from their home office when they have multiple screens. But the audit is progressing well, and we expect to bring back the financial statements, audited financial statements, in June. But the numbers contained within this report are the numbers that were provided to the auditors. And if there are any changes found throughout the audit, we'll make sure that we highlight that when that report comes back. So this report aims to accomplish 4 things. The first is provide council with an update on the year-end financial position as far as surplus and deficits go. The second is to actually seek authority to perform the transfers to and from reserve that are required in order to balance the financial statements. Although we often talk about surpluses and deficits, municipalities actually don't run surpluses and deficits because we have to balance the books at year end, and that's done through either taking more money out of reserve if we're in a deficit or transferring money to reserve if we're in a surplus. The third thing is seeking approval to transfer donations to a donation-specific reserve. If we've received donations in the year that were not utilized, we're asking permission to transfer them to reserve so that they can be used in future budgets for their intended purpose based on what the donation was received for. And lastly, we're seeking approval for the unbudgeted transfer, as in the motion, for $4.144 million in order to pay off all of our internal debentures. As council will remember, during the 2026 budget deliberations, staff recommended removing internal debt from our budget in order to reduce the levy. These 3 projects relate to major capital work that was done. And in the year that it was done, we took the financing strategy to repay ourselves over time with annual levy contributions. So there was an unfinanced capital outlay. At December 31st, 2025, staff believed that there was enough within the one-time funding reserve that we could repay that amount or repay any unfinanced liabilities using the one-time funding reserve so that we would not have to continue to raise tax levy to repay those amounts. So this report seeks for the approval to do that so that it does not have to be included in any future budgets. And I will note, as Mary Lou mentioned, the one-time funding reserve, after all of the transfers recommended within this report, is sitting at an estimated $6.924 million as of December 31st, 2025. And the last thing I'll highlight is throughout the report, you'll see the word projected a lot. Again, though, these are staff's finalized numbers, but we don't call them finalized until our auditors have signed off on them. So we use the word projected, but they are, from staff's perspective, pretty much final. Within the summary section of the report, we talk about the overall surplus of the county, which is projected to be $1.8 million. This is made up of a $500,000 operating deficit and a $2.3 million capital surplus. When we look at that number compared to our overall tax levy of $78,362,800, that is about 2.32% variance to the budget. However, I think it's important to note that the county has a lot of other revenue sources other than levy. The total the total expenditures within the 2025 budget is about $302 million. 176 of this is related to the operating budget, and 176 is related to the operating budget, and 126 is related to the capital budget. Now, that capital number is higher than an average year, as we have $51 million in there for Rockwood redevelopment. But when you compare the surplus to that $300 million gross budget, it's closer to a 0.6% variance compared to the total expenditures within our budget. Then I'm outlining a lot of major impacts in the summary section of this report. I'm only going to touch on one here because I'll talk about them later in the report. And that's our savings in salaries and benefits, specifically benefits. We renew our group insurance benefit rates every April. And so when we're making the budget, we have to make an assumption for what those benefit rates will renew at. We actually went out to market in 2025 for benefit rates and saw significant savings. So across the board, any department that has staff will see savings within their group benefit insurance premiums that are paid by the county. So when you're hearing staffing and benefit surpluses, that is a component for every single department with staff. Next up is a chart that breaks down all of the transfers to and from reserve and the overall surpluses by our four overall departments that we look at the county, which would be corporate services, planning, community development, human services, and transportation. And unless there's any questions to this point, I'll just jump into corporate services.
Okay, and indeed, a lot of work has gone into this, so maybe we'll just pause at this point just to see if there are any questions on what you've presented thus far. Okay, it looks like you're good to continue. Thank you.
The corporate services department is projecting a overall surplus of $1.294 million. The majority of this is coming from the operating budget of $1.298 million, and there's a $5,300 capital surplus. Within the corporate services is the administration department, which is made up of clerks, CAO, legal, finance, HR, communications, IT, and the general administration departments. And overall, they're projecting a surplus of $481,000. Again, this is primarily related to operating. Savings were seen within salaries and benefits, as just discussed, but additionally, there were savings due to temporary staffing vacancies throughout the year across a lot of departments, but finance and communications, the CAO department and HR all saw temporary vacancies, which created surplus in the years as we were down staff. There were additional surpluses seen within HR and legal as we spent less on external legal fees than we expected. And staff are recommending that of that surplus, $77,700 be transferred to the council communications reserve. So that number comes from the communications specific surplus within that overall administration surplus. And the reason staff are recommending that is in 2026, we're replacing the AV equipment for council chambers. And we want to ensure that there's enough money in that reserve to cover off the replacement. But additionally, in 2024, we did the same thing and took the council communications surplus and put it into this, or sorry, the communication surplus and put it into this specific reserve because we knew that the price had increased significantly. So this transfer will also help us in future budgets that we don't have to increase that annual contribution based on the increased pricing that we've seen. And then the remaining balance of this surplus would go to the one-time funding reserve. Additionally, in 2025, there's a net $279,500 surplus in investment income. This does not generate a surplus, as our investment policy says that any income over 1% or any investment income over 1% is automatically transferred to the one-time funding reserve. But I do want to highlight it. There would have been a surplus of about $554,000. But in the year, staff made the accounting decision to write down one of our investments to its fair market value. It's an investment that we've held since 2013, and it's been below market value since 2021, and staff did not expect it to recover in any near future. So we wanted our books to represent the actual value of the investments we had. So there was a $274,000 write down on that investment, which nets against our overall investment income. Then within the administration department, the IT department is projecting a small surplus due to higher than budgeted tower fee rentals. The information services department, which is a $1.2 million budget that gets allocated out to all the departments based on their actual license counts and computer counts, is projecting a deficit of $27,800, and that's due to licensing costs coming in higher than budgeted. The assessment budget is projecting a deficit of $18,400. These are our MPAC fees. The budget was built on the assumption of a 2.5% increase, and the actual increase was 3.4%. The council budget is projecting a deficit of $30,700, and this deficit is caused by higher than budgeted professional fees, conferences, and travels and meals. The property budget, which is this building as well as the adjoining or the neighboring building that's rented by the Canadian Mental Health Association, is projecting a capital and operating deficit of $75,900. This is made up of a $59,200 operating deficit, which is primarily driven by increased repairs and maintenance to our HVAC equipment, as well as our elevators and increased snow removal. There's a capital deficit of $16,700 due to overages within our HVAC control system upgrade that was in 2025, as well as some unbudgeted costs for the emergency roof repairs that were outlined in CSR CW 1925. Now, those repairs that were approved in that report did not get done until last week and this week. Therefore, they will come in 2026. We expected them at the time of developing the budget to get done in 2025. So they were not rebudgeted for, and it will create a deficit in 2026. The provincial offenses budget is projecting a $102,900 surplus net of our cost share with Bruce County, as this department is shared with Bruce County based on our census population. We saw pretty consistent ticket volumes, but a few large tickets really drove a surplus in this department. I say it every time, but this is a hard department to budget for their revenues based on significant variability on when tickets are laid and paid, and then also when those large ticket items are going to come in. We are seeing increased court operating costs, as Amanda Kokas outlined in her annual report last month. And in order to combat this, we are increasing our collection efforts to try to continue to increase those revenues. Court security is projecting a deficit of $120,000. This was communicated through report CAOR CW 1525 and is due to a variety of reasons, including increased prisoner transport, as well as higher in-person court attendance. This deficit is proposed to be funded by the one-time funding reserve. Taxation and other, which is our supplementals and write-offs budget, is projecting a surplus of $785,000, which is made up of $676,000 of higher supplemental tax billings and $108,000 less write-offs than what we had budgeted for. This is one that's hard to project, but internally we're talking about ways that maybe we can survey lower tiers throughout the year to try to get a handle on where these subs and write-offs may be sitting. But again, they can change significantly at the end of the year. The health unit, healthcare and education funding, which is our payments to the health unit, as well as our 5-year commitment to Bright Shores, is projected to end the year on budget. The WSIB and weekly indemnity budget, which is our internal insurance budget for WSIB and short-term disability for a specific labor group, is projecting to end the year with a surplus of $90,500. This is a good news story, as we saw a decrease in the number and duration of claims that came through this budget in 2024. Excuse me. Climate change is projecting an overall surplus of $107,500. $76,300 of this relates to operating budget and is caused by staffing vacancies, as well as us using unbudgeted grants to cover positions that were intended to be funded by levy. Additionally, staff secured a unbudgeted grant for $10,000 from Enbridge. That was just due to general climate change initiatives that we were already doing. And the capital budget is projecting a surplus of $31,200. This is due to lower than expected spending for the Support for Sustainable Agriculture project, as well as the Climate Change Opportunity Fund. Staff are recommending that the capital surplus and the $10,000 surplus created by the Enbridge grant be transferred to the Energy Audit Reserve, and that the remaining surplus go to the General One-Time Funding Reserve. That is the end of corporate services. I can pause there and take a drink of water if that's okay.
Yes, you do that, and I'll look around the room to see if there are any questions at this point. Okay, so when you're ready, go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Next up, we have planning and community development. The planning operating budget is projecting a $95,200 deficit, which is driven by overages in salaries and benefits, as well as lower local and subdivision application fees. Similar to POA, this is a hard this is hard to forecast and budget for these revenues, as there's significant variability on when these applications actually come in. Staff are proposing that this deficit be funded by the surpluses within the civic addressing, agriculture, and forestry and trails department, and that the net balance be funded from the one-time funding reserve, which is projected to be $45,900. The planning capital budget is projected to end the year on budget. These projects are funded from reserve and do not create a surplus. The civic addressing department is projecting a surplus of $8,000 due to less spending than expected on signage. The forestry and the agriculture department, is projecting a $30,300 deficit. This is a result of increased billing for bylaw work from Grace Sawville Conservation Authority. The total billing from GCSA was within our budgeted amount, but they spent more time on bylaw work, which is coded to agriculture, and less time on forestry and trails than what we had budgeted. So there's a deficit created in agriculture and an offsetting surplus created within forestry and trails, but it's still the same amount of levy between the two. These deficits within agriculture, though, are offset by savings from lower than budgeted spending on beaver and coyote pelts. They're grants, sorry. The forestry and trails budget, as mentioned, is in a large surplus of $71,600 due to the Gray Sauble issue mentioned before. Additionally, we received unbudgeted grants to put towards our buckthorn mitigation work that was already included in the budget. The economic development and tourism budget is projected to have a $41,000 surplus with a $41,700 operating surplus, which is due to temporary staffing vacancies, lower than budget benefit rates, and utilizing federal grants to fund a position that was budgeted to be funded from levy. These savings were offset slightly by increased snow removal costs at the Sydenham campus. The economic development tourism capital budget is projecting a deficit of $700 due to slightly higher than budgeted costs on the tourism website upgrade project. Community transportation is projecting a surplus of $82,300. This surplus is the result of us submitting our final report for the GTR program, which ran from 2019 to 2025. As we were going along with this program, we were doing annual submissions, and we were putting in Grey County contributions based on what we expected we would need, what we had in our budgets for levy and transfers from reserve, based on what we were expected to need to get the program through the entire 5-6 years of the grant. Costs ended up being lower in the last few years, so we actually didn't have to put that money into the budget, or we actually didn't have to put that money into the grant program in those earlier years, and the ministry allowed us to they allowed us to request those funds be returned to us, so we increased our grant revenue in 2025 above what our actual expenditures were, but it was really them repaying costs that we funded in previous years that they should have funded by grant. In addition to this surplus, this budget did not need to access any of the $178,000 that was budgeted to come from one-time funding to continue community transit for the GTR program to March 31st, as well as the planning and continuation of certain GTR routes after April 1st, as approved in the budget. Grey Roots is projecting a surplus of $62,100, with the operating budget projecting a surplus of $86,100. This surplus is driven primarily by higher than budgeted admission revenue. We had a few really popular exhibits in 2025, which saw increased traffic and revenue. Additionally, there were temporary staffing vacancies as a result of doing a village lean pilot project, as well as benefit savings. And we didn't use our funding that was allocated to the Community Cultural Initiatives Fund in 2025, as we wanted to carry those funds into 2026 to better align with the proposed Indigenous Advisory Circle project timelines. Grey Roots Capital is projecting a deficit of $24,000 due to higher than anticipated costs for the air handling unit, archive upgrades, and theater upgrades. There is a donation that can be put towards the archive upgrades that's currently sitting in the operating budget. So again, you see an offsetting surplus within operating and then an offsetting deficit within capital, but they net against each other. Human Services. The Ontario Works Department is projecting a surplus of $61,600. The surplus is primarily the result of lower than budgeted expenditures for our non-shareable costs with the province. These relate to funerals for non-social assistance recipients. Additionally, within the Ontario Works Department, or Ontario Works Administration Department, we saw savings for staffing and benefits, but these costs are funded 50-50 with the province, so they do not create 100% surplus. Early learning and childcare saw a surplus of $344,200. A good chunk of this surplus is related to the change into the new CWELC program that was not known at the time of developing our 2025 budget. We don't get those transfer payment agreements usually to the beginning of the year. And it resulted in a lower than budgeted municipal contribution for these programs. Additionally, it was a bit of a transition year as we received the funding and we're working on rolling it out. But the funding was for the whole year, but we only had, for some daycare providers, maybe 11 to 10 months of expenditures for them, as it took time to get them enrolled in the system. And then the ministry also completed a review of the 2022 and 2023 submission, which resulted in in funds being returned to the county that were not expected, and that created an additional surplus. Staff are recommending that we take this surplus and put it into the early on center capital reserve. CSR CW 0726 outlined that the early on Hanover project came in over budget, or is coming in over budget, and recommended that we utilize 2025 surplus to help fund the overages in 2026. Housing is projecting an overall surplus of $540,800. $400,000 of this relates to the operating budget, and $175,000 of that $400,000 relates to the county-owned housing properties. There's lots of ins and outs within this department, but the big ones are a $250,000 surplus in our tenant rents due to changes in tenant circumstances resulting in higher rents, as well as a continued trend of seeing lower vacancy rates within our buildings, which is attributable to quicker and less turnover between tenants. We also saw surpluses in salaries and benefits as there was temporary staffing vacancies throughout the year, but some of these savings are offset by increased contracted services, as if we have a custodian who's off, we will bring in a contracted custodian to maintain that building. Those surpluses are offset by a $221,000 deficit in snow removal. Significant overages as we have to start hauling away snow as winter gets more extreme. It creates significant overages within this budget. Within the operating surplus is $225,000 for the not-for-profit housing budget. This is a result of our annual funding reconciliations coming in and funds being returned to the county based on less than expected spending from the not-for-profit providers. Additionally, in 2025, we continue to have agreements and mortgages ending, resulting in lower subsidy being required to the providers. The housing capital budget is projecting a surplus of $139,800. This surplus is the result of 3 capital projects not being completed in 2025 that were funded by levy. But it is offset by overages related to a $100,000 deductible being required at the housing unit at 248 7th Avenue East. This is a separate claim from the fire. When they were doing remediation work for the fire, they actually found damages in the building that were not related to the fire, resulting in a second claim being required, resulting in another $100,000 being required to be put out by this budget. Additionally, in 2025, we demolished Rose Lane in Dundalk. We expected that project to be completed in 2024, so we did not rebudget for it. So it created a deficit in 2025. Staff are recommending that the net surplus here be transferred to the housing capital budget to help fund future capital needs in this department. Long-term care, there's a recurring theme throughout all of them. We had a arbitrated settlement that went back multiple years come in 2025. When we are out of agreement with our collective agreements, staff make their best estimate for what we think any retro pay will be for the current year, and we accrue those on our books. The arbitrated settlement ended up being higher than what we expected, resulting in a deficit in 2025. However, because we technically under accrued in 2023 and 2024, it created a surplus in these lines in those budgets. Those surpluses would have been transferred into the home specific capital reserves. So now we're suggesting that the deficit in the current year be funded by those reserves as well. So it's really a timing difference on those. Grey Gables is projecting an overall deficit of $368,000, which is made up of an operating deficit of $500,000, as mentioned above, relating to current year and retroactive wage costs. Additionally, there were higher costs for legal, association fees, utilities, food, and waste removal. As well, they also saw reduced tenant revenue. These costs, though, were offset by a capital surplus of $135,000, as staff were able to utilize comprehensive minor capital funding that was not known at the time of adopting the budget. Lee Manor is projecting an overall deficit of $703,000. And this is made up of a $718,000 operating deficit. Same thing, retroactive wages. Additionally, there were deficits in legal fees, computer purchases, training, medical supplies, physician on-call costs, and staffing due to higher acuity of our residents. This is offset by a $14,800 surplus within capital due to some slight savings in their capital projects. Rockwood Terrace is in a surplus of $469,000, which is made up of a $337,200 operating budget surplus, and a $131,800 capital surplus. This building, as we are getting closer and closer to the new Rockwood redevelopment, they are only doing repairs that are absolutely needed. So they're seeing savings within their maintenance budgets and capital budgets, as if work does not need to be completed and it can get us through the next couple of years, it is not being completed. Long-term care redevelopment. When this budget was developed, we expected to spend approximately $51 million in 2025, which was to be funded by unused provincial grants, levy, and a construction loan through Infrastructure Ontario. Due to some timing differences, we only spent $22.1 million. So we utilized up the grant that we had, we used our levy, and we're left with $10.6 million that's currently sitting as unfunded and will be rolled into the construction loan that we'll take out in 2026. However, this does not create a surplus or deficit in 2025. Paramedic Services is projecting a overall deficit of $6,600 with an operating surplus of $94,800. The surplus is primarily driven by increased CPLTC grant that was received in the year that wasn't known at the time of developing the budget. Additionally, we saw savings in salaries and benefits due to lower than budgeted lost time, lower enrollment in OMERS, reduced benefit rates. So these savings were taken and we significantly reduced the amount that we took out of reserve in order to smooth the deployment review. So the plan is built to kind of increase the levy each year. So in the earlier years, we're taking from reserve to kind of smooth that out. In this budget, though, we didn't have to take as much as we planned out of reserve. These savings, though, were offset by increased medical supplies and medication costs, which is a result of continued increased call volumes and the increased cost of these supplies and medications. The paramedic capital budget has a deficit of $101,000, which is related to the overages for our duty supervisor vehicles. This was a project in 2024, but the project happens in two steps where we purchase the vehicle and then we send it away to be converted. We purchased the vehicles, 2 supervisor trucks in 2024, and we expected to get the conversion done in 2024, so we didn't rebudget, but the actual conversion cost came in 2025, creating a deficit. And staff are recommending that this deficit be funded from the Paramedic Services General Equipment Reserve. I can stop there before we get into construction.
Okay, any questions there? No? Okay, I see people are smiling because you have earned the honorary position of Director Taylor being just before lunch, so so please go ahead.
Transportation Services is projecting an overall surplus of $42,800. This is made up of an operating deficit of $1.96 million. The primary driver here was the winter budget being significantly over budget, being the worst budgeted winter that we've had in the last 5 years when we went back and looked. Winter has a significant impact on this budget and can vary significantly based on how much snow and how long the winter lasts. Increased snow means increased time for our staff as they're out plowing our roads, and our mechanics are working more to maintain the vehicles. It also results in significant increases for actual stock materials like sand and salt. Additionally, in the capital section, I'm going to talk about tandems that we have on delay, but we currently have 5 tandems that were supposed to be replaced in 2023, 2024, and 2025 that have not been replaced. So we have assets that are beyond their useful life, and therefore we're seeing increased breakdowns and maintenance required on those vehicles. And the reason we haven't received them is supply chain delays that are out of our control. Additionally, we saw overages in our building maintenance costs as our sand storage buildings and our facilities saw some damages due to ice damming and significant winter in 2025. However, this large operating deficit is offset by an overall surplus of $2,008,000 in capital. The major roads and bridge construction budget is projecting to have a surplus of $3.1 million. This budget has $3.3 million worth of expenditures in it. So this represents a 9.5% surplus. Early in the year, we knew this budget was going to be in a surplus position as tenders came back very competitively with surpluses that would have been communicated to council as they're almost all over $500,000. However, when those numbers come back to council, we also include a 5% or sorry, a 10% contingency on those awarded amounts, which are meant to cover off any change orders or asphalt index price adjustments. We did not see a lot of those in 2025, which created significant savings. So I attribute that to good work from Pat's engineering team for having the tenders built well, that changes were not needed, as well as his contract administration team for staying on top of the contractors and making sure the quantities were correct. But additionally, the asphalt index is something that's completely out of our control, and it just ended up being a good year in 2025 where we didn't see a significant increase there. There are also additional savings within the major capital project for non-project specific costs, such as minor capital, bridge design, structure investigations, land acquisitions, and traffic signal upgrades. These are annual budgets that are done on an as-needed basis. And 2025 just happened to be a year where not as much work was required, so it created surpluses. All budgeted projects were completed in 2025, with the exception of Grey Road 19 and 21 intersection upgrades, Structure 900, 164, and Structure 900, 363. They have all been rebudgeted for 2026 and onward, and therefore they do not create a deficit. However, staff were asking that we take the $378,000 of levy funds for the Grey Road 19 and 21 project and transfer them into a project-specific reserve so that they can be utilized in the 2027 capital budget. The other two projects were funded entirely from development charges and our own reserves, and therefore do not create a surplus as they weren't completed. Facilities and Depots is projecting a deficit of $1.5 million, which is attributable to the Chatsworth Stand Storage building collapsing and being rebuilt in 2025. It was planned to be replaced, I believe, in 2026 or 2027, but it went down in 2025, so we had to replace it right away. And that entire amount creates a deficit as it wasn't budgeted for. The machinery and equipment capital budget is projecting a surplus of $365,000, which is a timing difference. We had sold a Gradall, which was intended to fund the purchase of a new rubber tire excavator. The excavator came in 2024, but we didn't end up selling the Gradall till 2025. So it created a deficit in 2024 and an offsetting surplus in 2024. As mentioned, currently we had 5 tandems in this budget. 2 of them were ordered in 2023, 1 was ordered in 2024, and 2 were ordered in 2025. We did not receive any this year, so they've all been rebudgeted for next year. Additionally, there was a payloader ordered in late 2025 that was expected to be received, so we did not rebudget for it. So that payloader will create a deficit in 2026. Lastly, our 2 electric half tons that were in the budget for 2025, we received one of them before the end of the year, but we did not receive the other. However, we did know that there was a delay on this, so we did rebudget for it, so it will not create a surplus or a deficit. Last part of the report is our donations to being transferred to reserve, just outlining the amounts that we received throughout the year in donations throughout the homes and requesting that staff have the authority to transfer these directly to a home-specific donation reserve. Thank you.
Okay, take another sip of water. And thank you very much. And the report that you did submit is very detailed. So we had a chance to review all of that. Keeping in mind too that our recommended motion that's on the floor, moved and seconded, is to receive. We're just taking this in for information. So if you have any further detailed questions from either what you read or heard this morning, I'll look for hands. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Gregg.
Few quick questions. Thanks for the fulsome report, Garrett. Ton of information in there. A couple quick questions. Approximately $500,000 in an operating deficit position from last year, and that's that benefits from enhanced supplementals. So fair to say we were about $1.3 million approximately in a deficit for our actual operating expenses. How would that compare to the last few years prior? Would you have an idea on some context there?
Through the warden, that operating deficit is really driven by transportation. I could say in previous year, the operating budget was in a surplus, but that was really driven by increased long-term care funding that we didn't know. So sometimes 1 or 2 departments that have unexpected budget items can really drive that surplus or deficit. The $1.9 million operating deficit within transportation, again, is the worst that we've had in the last 5 years. I believe they were in a modest surplus last year. Again, though, this is just a budget that is going to swing significantly based on the weather that we see. And it's really pulling the overall operating position of the county down. As you said, supplemental billings were $785,000. So we're in a $1.3 million debt or operating deficit without them. But if you take out the transportation operating deficit, the rest of the county is in about $600,000 operating surplus.
I was going to say thanks, Garrett. Okay. Second question here. I have it just, I didn't want to interject through your presentation, but quick question. The planning staffing costs being higher and development fees, development in a general context, we look for revenue recovery for some of those services provided. Were planning staffing costs higher, or is it a net planning staffing costs were what we projected them to be? They just did not benefit from as much revenue being applied against our expected planning staffing costs. And if staffing costs were higher in the planning department, I'm wondering what drove that when we weren't not seeing as much development activity.
If I were to respond to that, I think we'd have to go into closed as far as what drove that staffing overages within the planning department.
Okay. Last question I have noted would be the housing overage that we have. Can it be placed in the reserve similar to some, and use the communications 77,000 as an example, where I guess I did kind of have a question there too. I think it was $20,000 every year maybe that we put towards audio visual. Is it just anticipated that 20,000 becomes 40,000, or were we going to expend more this year consuming that 77,000, and it would be a very small incremental? Now I'm going to use that as an example for the housing. How much more do we have to step up to meet that 1% of levy contribution for housing? Can that overage be placed in a reserve and we draw upon that until we've met that 1% levy contribution for housing?
Yeah, so the communications one is the $77,000 is not intended to all be used in 2026. However, we would, if we didn't do this transfer, it's expected that we would deplete what's in that reserve currently for that project in 2026. Then we would have to start planning to replace that equipment eventually, which is now more expensive than what we had thought it was going to be. So I don't have the exact number in front of me, but if it was $20,000 and now we think it's going to be 40, we would then have to increase our transfers to reserve, where what staff are recommending is we put that surplus into that reserve. So we're starting at a slightly higher balance, so we don't have to increase that reserve transfer right away, so that we're ready to replace that that equipment in the next life cycle. The way the recommendation is written now for transfers for the housing surplus is that it goes into the housing general building reserve or general capital reserve. So it would be applied against housing's 10-year capital plan. We look at what needs to happen or what staff want to complete over the next 10 years, and then look at what we have available to us in reserves. And then we evaluate, okay, what do we need to increase our levy by each year in order to meet those needs? And then that becomes our budget ask based on what we think we can accomplish. I think you're talking more towards the Affordable Housing Fund reserve, which is a separate reserve that is meant to be funded entirely by levy. And currently the budgets, you're right, are working to catch up, as the contribution to reserve did not increase as much as the levy had increased over the last 3 years. So I suppose it could be you could take some of that surplus and transfer it into the Affordable Housing Reserve instead of the capital reserve. However, I believe the intent of that reserve is still to get up to that 1%. And I believe the way we have our budget built right now is that we'd be there by 2026.
Okay, thanks for that. I just know right now we're looking at anywhere from 7 to 10% in a budget increase for 2027, which is totally not something that would be acceptable to whoever's sitting around this table when it comes that time. And I'm certainly looking at any opportunity that we've already taken those funds from the taxpayer. That's why it's a surplus. And I'm just looking for any opportunity that we can have those funds placed somewhere where they could be protected, drawn against, and mitigate that, all those escalations or those drivers to that 27 increase. The other question I have, when it comes back, I'll use the Conservation Authority as an example, a very, very, very small, tiny budget. But our tos and froms the reserve, we can see the reserve balances is part of that report. Is it something that staff can incorporate, like a third column there? So that we would be aware and give us a little more context about what our reserve balances are? Because I do feel like just what we have here, we're still operating a little bit in a vacuum of information or context. And I would greatly benefit by having it provided. What is our reserve place with each one of those? So just comment from me in terms of maybe what could be included in future reporting for my benefit.
Yeah, I think that's for sure doable. We currently, the projected reserve balances at the budget time are included in the budget package, and those are available on our open book page. But I think we definitely could provide, after these transfers, here's where each reserve is sitting. I know Sue is currently on her work plan this year is to have an updated reserve policy. So I don't want to speak for her, but potentially we include back in that policy also how those reserves get reported back to council and how frequently. But as far as attaching that report to, we have to provide it to the auditors anyway, a detail of all of our reserves. So attaching it to the report could be done as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be a benefit because I certainly have, and Brian's probably looking over my left shoulder. He sees that I have the budget open at different times in the meeting today. It's a lot of work if I have to go back and pursue that. So I'm just wondering any opportunities to provide that in a little more upfront manner would be, I think, helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Not seeing any further questions. Again, thank you for sharing the information in advance in writing through the report, as well as elaborating today for the verbal explanations. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that motion is passed. Thank you very much. So it is indeed lunchtime. And we would like to reconvene at 1:30. We do have Director Taylor is lined up to present the next report along with Director Hoy. And he's at a conference right now, so we're trying to be specific on timing. So if we could all be back in our seats and ready to go at 1:30, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Committee of the Whole members. We are back from lunch and we are picking up on item 7D. I will read out the motion and look for a mover and seconder, and then we have three of our senior management team ready to respond and talk about it. It's recommended that report PDR CW 1826 be received regarding Bill 98, the Building Homes and Improvement Transportation Infrastructure Act 2026 and related environmental registry and regulatory registry postings, and that this that report PDR CW 1826 be forwarded to the province as the County of Grey's comments on the proposed legislative and policy updates as posted on the environmental registry through postings 026 300 301 302 304 305 309 310 311 312 313 314 315 I think that's supposed to be 316 and there's 09 019 8316 019 8020 and regulatory registry posting 26 and 26 MMAH 009, and that this report be shared with members of Provincial Parliament, Vickers and Saunderson, and the county's planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee, the Agricultural Advisory Committee, and member municipalities of Grey County. And that Grey County support the correspondence received from the Municipal Engineers Association regarding its comments on the Ontario Regulatory Registry 26 MT 0003, and that county staff submit such support and comments to the province, and that staff be authorized to proceed prior to county council approval as per section 26.6B of our procedural bylaw 513422. After all that, somebody's going to move this for me. May I ask for a mover, please? Okay, we've got it moved by Councillor Nielsen and seconded by Councillor Hutchinson. So it is now on the floor, and we're going to begin with Director Taylor. Then we'll hear from Director Hoy and Director Myers as well. Director Taylor, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Madam Warden. I will just share my screen here. Just a second. Can you confirm just that you can see those the screen there?
Yes, we can, and we can hear you clearly.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Sorry I can't be there to join you in person. And thank you for reading out that incredibly wordy motion. It's almost as wordy as the report itself. So I'll try to touch on some of the highlights here alongside my colleagues, Director Hoy and Director Myers, as you've said. This really has been a team effort, sometimes with these provincial legislative changes and ERO postings. There's not a lot of time to respond. So everybody from the CAO and Deputy CAO to legal services, transit and EDTC staff, transportation services, finance, planning and ecology have all played a big part in this report, including working nights and weekends to try to get it done in time for council's preparation. So thank you to all of our colleagues in that regard. So with that, we'll just go on. So on March 30th, the province introduced Bill 98, which is labeled as the Building Homes and Improving Infrastructure Act. I can report that Bill 98 has now received second reading and has been referred to standing committee. Similar to some of the other legislative changes we've talked about in recent years, this bill is proposing to change a number of acts, including the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, the Municipal Act, the Building Code Act, the Metrolinx Act, and so on and so forth. There's a lot to respond here, and I know it is a wordy report, but we really wanted to give council a summary of what some of the changes are and where some of those impacts could touch the county or the member municipalities. And similar to what we heard from Kate at WOWC this morning, there's been a lot of collaboration. We met with municipal planners on this to talk about some of the impacts. We talked about the different departments. We also met with the planning subject matter experts group at WOWC to try to get a handle on exactly what's being proposed here and what the impacts are. As with other legislative changes, there's some that we see as positive and some that may be more challenging, and others we simply don't know the impacts just yet. With respect to some of the changes and the regulatory changes being made, there are a number of threads they're picking up on from previous consultations, including Bill 60 and some of the earlier legislative changes. So some of this is now passing the regulations that were promised in previous legislative updates in that regard. So with that, I'll get into some of the changes themselves. Two of the postings relate to standardizing official plans, and this is something that had been sort of teased in one of the earlier consultations. But more specifically, they've got one posting that's speaking to prescribing a table of contents for municipal tier and single tier official plans, such that every municipality across the province would have the same 12 land use designations. They would also have the same schedules in their official plan and the same sort of headings throughout the table of contents and in the plan. There's another posting where the province is looking at how to deal with upper tier official plans or secondary plans in that regard. And so in Gray's case, along with our member municipalities, we really need to understand both postings to know how they're going to impact the county and member municipalities. Certainly, we do already what we can to try to reduce duplication between the county plan and your own municipal official plans, and we'd like to pursue that going forward.
Oh, it looks like maybe frozen. Okay, and Director Taylor, if you can hear us, I will just let you know that you are frozen. Sometimes you can still hear audio from your side.
Municipal official plans in that regard. And so there's two different dates. One is for the fast growing municipalities, but none of our Grey County municipalities are in that fast growing list. So they're all under this January 1st, 29 date. We're not clear from the information that's been released whether this is a thou shalt have your official plans updated by that date, or whether that's if you're doing a regular update after January 1st, 2029, that's when you need to consider the updates. So as staff, we see some merit in terms of some sort of standardization and clarification, and it would assist developers that are working across multiple different municipalities. We certainly don't think a one-size-fits-all approach will cover everybody here. So while there could be some standardization perhaps in the mapping or even some of the headings, we do think there needs to be that ability for municipalities to still have autonomy in setting their own policies in that regard that are best for their municipality. I think we talk in the report that one of the designations would be a neighborhood designation, and certainly a neighborhood designation in Hanover may be very different than a neighborhood designation in, say, the city of Ottawa. The other thing that we'd note here is that if municipalities are all having to update their official plans, and particularly for those municipalities that have just gone through a major update or a new official plan, the hope would be that there could be some flexibility on the timing, and perhaps the province could offer some implementation funding. The other strain it's going to place on the planning system is on approval authorities. So for counties across the province who have their official plans approved by the province, and for the county itself who approves member municipal official plans, if they're all sort of coming due at the same date, it could be challenging to get those all done in an expeditious fashion. One of the other changes the province is looking at is prescribing what municipalities can require in terms of studies and reports as part of a complete application. And so the province, through the ERO posting, has released two lists of studies. One is a core list, and so that would include things like a servicing study or a planning justification report, and the other is contingent studies. And so those contingent studies are the ones that wouldn't necessarily be required on all applications, but might be required for certain applications, such as a hazard assessment or a noise study in that regard. With respect to the staff considerations here, staff would note that since 2025, the province has required municipalities going through an official plan amendment process to get ministerial approval on new official plans which speak to complete applications. So the one hope here is that if the province prescribes the list, then we wouldn't be caught in that sort of limbo any further of needing that ministerial approval. We've offered some suggestions in the report on maybe some additional studies that could be added to the list, and maybe there's one or two that could go from the contingent list to the core list, just because we see them coming up more and more frequently on applications. With that, we'll move on to the next. One of the other changes the province is looking at, which is interesting, is they're looking at prescribing a mandatory minimum lot size for service residential land. So this would be residential land on water and sewer services. And what they proposed right now is 175 square meters across the province, or roughly 1,880 square feet. In looking at Grey's municipal zoning bylaws, we don't have any municipalities that would allow for a lot size quite this small. The smallest we had is certain townhouse lots could be in and around 200 square meters, but certainly 175 square meters is a challenge. And they further released some verbiage to state that where a municipal zoning bylaw has minimum frontage or depth requirements that would make this standard not feasible, then those minimum depth and frontage would be inapplicable in that regard. They've made it clear that developers could still choose to create larger lots, but municipalities shall allow for, at a minimum, a residential lot size of this size. Staff support this idea in principle, but do have some concerns. And this is another one where maybe a broad brush, one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for the entire province, particularly in those communities like we have in Grey County, where you get a significant amount of snowfall, and in most cases don't have transit, or certainly don't have a higher order transit, and therefore people are more dependent on personal automobiles, then perhaps some of these communities need a slightly larger size in that regard. We'd also note that particularly in some of our established neighborhoods, if people were to start intensifying in this nature, it might have an impact on existing infrastructure, including servicing and stormwater, if we're seeing more impervious surfaces. And it also might have an impact on people's ability to have an additional residential unit, whether as a detached unit or say a basement apartment in that regard. So the ask back to the province here is, could we look at some stratification here? Maybe 175 meters is perfect for Toronto, but maybe in rural Ontario, and particularly where we get more snow, maybe we need a slightly larger minimum lot size to be considered in that regard. With respect to the next sort of bucket of changes, if you will, they're proposing to change the Water and Wastewater Public Corporations Act, as well as the Safe Drinking Water Act. And I must admit, particularly that first piece of legislation is not one I'm intimately familiar with. So I'm so thankful that we have both municipal staff and our own legal services team that can help us understand the impact of these changes. In effect, the changes to the Water and Wastewater Public Corporations Act would be looking at making sure that such corporations are maintained in public ownership and that they can't have private ownership shareholders in that regard. More specifically, they're looking at these corporations, the shareholders could be federal, provincial, municipal, or an agent of any of those levels of government. So one of the key considerations here from a staff perspective would be, who can be prescribed as an agent? And I think there's a public interest in making sure that these water and wastewater systems remain in public ownership, and there is public policy setting the rates and infrastructure expansions in that regard. So we'd be keen to understand that. There was also a concern raised by a number of member municipal staff about the impact of these changes and whether or not through these changes the province could prescribe municipalities to need to service some of their neighbors and expand beyond their own municipal boundaries in that regard. The province, in a separate posting, is gauging interest on any municipalities that might be interested in adopting a water and wastewater public corporation model. And so they've invited municipalities to submit their interest or intent in that regard. With respect to the changes to the Safe Drinking Water Act, the province is looking at further enabling the use of communal services, whether it be water or wastewater in this regard. So they're noting that criteria could be prescribed, where if those criteria were met, municipalities would be required to give consent to such communal systems. And communal systems might not be a topic that you're all intimately familiar with. The ability to use communal servicing exists right now, but prior to a new development setting up communal servicing, it's asked to enter into a responsibility agreement with the host municipality. And essentially what that responsibility agreement would do would be to cover that water or wastewater system should something ever happen and the developer can't afford to operate that system anymore. So needless to say, municipalities are reluctant to sign such responsibility agreements for fear of becoming the future operator of such systems, particularly where such systems aren't built to a municipal standard in that regard. So staff do have concerns. Certainly we support the notion of communal servicing, but we can't do so at the financial risk of our municipalities. In the municipal staff discussions, there was also a note to say that we wouldn't want to see these communal systems being used to justify disparate development all over our countryside. Certainly, if they're needed for our smaller settlement areas, that might be a good fit, but these shouldn't be used as a tool to further develop our agricultural areas, for example. With that, I'll move on to the next change. So the province has noted in their materials that the site plan control process is onerous and takes too long. And so they've proposed 5 potential solutions that could help ease this blockage in the system, if you will, that the province has stated. The first would be to simply remove site plan control, which Yes, it would clear that blockage, but it's not one that staff can recommend in that regard. And that was particularly echoed by our municipal partners, who are the ones that are approving site plan control. And it's a necessary tool to implement some of council's decisions in that regard. Another one they're looking at is to require a maximum of 3 circulations before a mandatory meeting is triggered to resolve issues. So typically a developer submits their technical studies for a site plan application. In some cases, those studies are sufficient and they proceed right to their approval. In some cases, say municipal engineering has feedback, they send it back to the proponent's engineer, and you can get caught sort of in that churn going back and forth between different technical experts. So the province is saying there needs to be a cap on the number of times it can be reissued or circulated in that regard. And then after that cap, you would need to have sort of a resolution meeting in that regard. They've also proposed that you could scope site plan even further and really focus on just those health and safety issues. And anything that's not a health and safety issue simply wouldn't be a part of site plan. And then for those health and safety issues, you could use certified professionals, and municipalities would be required to accept such studies as they are, so to speak. Certainly there's elements of that. Can site plan be further scope? Yeah, probably can. Should municipalities be required just to accept certain studies? That would be challenging, and particularly where it impacts municipal infrastructure, municipalities still need some level of oversight there. The fourth one is a municipal arbitration process or site plan review panel that would be operated by the municipality. There's certain merits in this solution, but the general feeling amongst municipal staff was this could add another layer and just delay things even further, particularly if it was prescribed that you automatically enter into arbitration once you get beyond a certain point, because it could be that you're already nearing a decision and the arbitration sort of resets the clock, if you will. And the fifth one, would be to require municipalities to have different levels of site plan approval. And I'll say in gray, this is largely already done. So if I think about our rural communities that might be entering into a site plan for an on-farm metal workshop, that's a fairly simplified process. Versus in one of our bigger communities, if we suddenly had a new, big box store come to town, then that's a more onerous site plan process. So staff see merit in some of these, particularly elements of item 3 and item 5, and to a lesser extent item 2. But we certainly can't support all of these options. The other thing we'd note in talking to municipal staff is this seems to be an issue that's very much geography specific. And so there are some municipalities outside of Gray that do take quite a long time to approve their site plans, in some cases in excess of a year. Quite often, a lot of our site plans at our municipalities in Gray do get done within the prescribed time frame of 60 days. The other thing staff noted as a challenge here is there are certain provincial ministries at times that are required to give their blessing to certain site plans in some geographies. And some of those ministries have a 10-week turnaround for their initial comments. And so when our timeline to process site plans is 60 days, that 10-week timeline isn't congruous in that regard. So certainly there's ways we can all sharpen our pencils and improve processes, and hopefully the province would sit down as a partner with some of their ministries and look to do the same. With respect to the next category of changes, these are ones that we worked very closely with our climate staff on, and Linda couldn't be here today, but she was instrumental in helping write this section of the report and prepare this section of the presentation. So the province has further made it clear that they do not support any level of green development standard or enhanced development standard, and we'll say message received on that one. The province has made that very clear over the past couple legislative changes, and Gray has pivoted our 3-county green development program to a fully voluntary recognition program in that regard. But they are looking at further changes that could impact both site plan control and also the types of conditions that could be put on a plan of subdivision or a consent in that regard, to further limit the types of sustainable design elements that could be included in that regard. And there's a certain degree here of uncertainty based on the fact that certain terms aren't defined. So sustainable design or sustainability in that regard isn't defined. And in order to understand what that means, we'd really need a definition. The province's own media briefing has spoken to landscaping and foliage requirements, soil composition, ornamental and design considerations would all be prohibited. And certainly some of those wouldn't impact Grey or member municipalities in a whole big way. But some of the landscaping and the environmental considerations could have very real impacts. And it could make it very difficult to implement the recommendations of environmental studies and carry those out in that regard. So we do have some concerns here. They're also proposing a change, and this is the last bullet on the slide, where they're removing a section in the Planning Act that requires municipalities to have climate change policies in their official plan. But at the same point, have also made it clear that the provincial planning statement requires climate change policies. So, the end result on municipalities is the same. We still need climate policies at the local level. It's just they're not saying it in both the Act and the provincial planning statement. They're just saying it in the provincial planning statement if these policies were to pass in that regard. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Hoy, who can take us through the harmonization of municipal road standards.
Thank you, Director Taylor.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank Scott and his team for putting this report together. They did a lot of work on it, and they were very good to work with us. So I'll be repeating a lot of what he says, about the folly of a kind of one-size-fits-all system. So just on page 16 of the report, or item 16, page 20, it's about the harmonization of road standards. So almost all municipalities use OPSS and OPSD, the provincial standards, right now. And then we will include special provisions as well for certain things that we might want to see, or things that we've experienced over the years that we might want that aren't necessarily in the standard specification. So just to give you a little example, one thing is all our culverts will have a delineator marker at the end in blue that we can find. It's got to be enough height that it won't get lost in the ditch and that type of thing. Well, maybe Windsor doesn't need that, maybe, or we all have our own little things that we like, and this would kind of take away our version of doing that. So Grey County has many municipalities. You all have your own contracts. You all have things in them that you look for, things that have worked over the years, varying topography, soil conditions, just municipal preference. Some people like things a different way. They have a separate standard. And we're completely comfortable with that, and it makes sense. There's a new contract. Every job has a contract, and it has all the things in it. Whether it's read by a contractor or not is a different issue. But there's stuff in there. This is what I want, and this is what's in the contract, and they bid on it, and we all just move forward. So, although in theory, it would be great to have just a construction contract. You just press a button and everything was the same. The province is just incredibly diverse, from Thunder Bay to here to Windsor. It's just, there's so many different soil conditions and topography and all those types of things that it's just one of those things that is just, no one knows exactly how this thing is going to work. So I'm just going to go over some of our main problems with it. And municipal engineers have the same problem. And the first thing is, what is the problem you're solving? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Everyone makes their contracts. It seems fine. We haven't heard a lot of people complaining about it. So we don't really know what the issue is. Our contracts are fine. They're clear. You just leave it the way it is. And just the general fact that I don't know how anyone could think that every contract in Ontario is going to be the same. Ontario is so diverse and beautiful and different. Why would we all be using the exact same construction methods or materials, or there's varying materials? And we look into that. Sometimes it's worth getting trap rock from up north. Sometimes it isn't, right? So it's all about judgment and use for money and return on investment and those types of things. So our next thing is just, because the government is not trying to force anything on us, they've also allowed, that was sarcastic, by the way, they've also allowed exemptions to this. So although you're not really supposed to use special provisions, you can apply to use these special provision through an exemption. Now, the one person was a speaker at the Good Roads Conference, and he was at one point the only staff member doing this. Now he said there's 3. But how 3 people are going to go over every construction tender in Ontario, that does not sound like a reduction in bureaucracy at all. I'm sure it won't come in a week, the response, unless it's a blanket no, maybe. So we don't really see how that's saving anything. We don't have to ask the province for certain things like that now. And then also they've added item 4, a reporting mechanism, which of course is very vague. We don't know exactly what that means. But again, we don't have to report on that now. So I don't really see what problem you're fixing or the reason for it. So we're, you know, the Public Works people generally, you might have heard this from your staff as well. It just seems like kind of a poor solution to an unidentified problem. So we don't see the reason why it's going forward, but that's kind of where we're at. And thanks, Scott, again for all the work.
Okay, so next we're going to hear from Director Myers.
I cannot top that. So I am here to talk to you about the proposed Fair Alignment and Seamless Transit Act and Metrolinx Act that are part of this. And what you'll note on the slide here and within the report is that the Fair Alignment and Seamless Transit Act provides the Ontario Minister of Transportation potential new authority to set and regulate transit fares, including prices, discounts, transport policies, transit systems prescribed by regulation, require use of a provincially approved unified fare payment system. They could establish geographic fare zones across participating transit systems and apply fare policies to across municipal boundaries rather than limiting them to individual municipalities, and support provincially led fare and service integration for priority routes. These are all things that we are assessing currently through let me get this right, Bruce, Dufferin, Gray, Wellington Regional Transit Study. But some of the comments that we have left in here as staff is that, you know, while the Act does not appear to apply automatically to all transit systems, it does allow the province to provide or prescribe specific systems through regulation. And this authority could extend to rural and regional systems, but we just don't know that yet based on what we're reading. And that could include everything happening in Grey County and being considered through this regional transit study. So while the intent of the Act is generally aligned with the direction being explored through this study, with particular respect to those seamless passenger experiences, moving towards common harmonized fare structures and integrating payment systems across jurisdictions, it's the change in where that governance potential exists that is a concern. So staff are really eager to understand the scope to which these new policies may apply, and if there are means to support service sustainability if they do come into effect. So we would raise concern that if municipalities are expected to remain financially responsible for service operations, but the province now has the ability to prescribe the terms of the service, including fares, then what does that mean for us, especially in a rural context where we know that systems are characterized by lower ridership and higher cost per ride? So that's something that we're waiting to learn more about, but are including in these comments here. And then around the Metrolinx Act, within this, 2 of our partners are actually within that Metrolinx Act right now. Dufferin and Wellington are both within, Gray and Bruce are both outside of. But it provides that Crown agency and assigns responsibility to provide leadership on regional transit, planning, coordination, and integration, which is something that we're studying right now, and to support unified fare systems and service coordination, and to enter into agreements with municipalities and partners. So our question and our comment as staff around the Metrolinx Act is that we're seeking clarity to understand if these policies, expectations, and standards are to be more broadly applied. Will an equitable funding formula similar to that received in the GTHA be available to rural services? So that is a main question mark for all project partners around the study right now. And we're also curious to understand if a governance shift towards a provincial entity is actually anticipated and what the speed would be for those proposed changes as we're in the midst of finalizing a draft plan to bring forward to you. So those are some of the comments that we have right now, but it's a big question mark because we don't know if it applies to what is currently in place, what might be in place, and where those questions end. So that is the end of my part of this report. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Madam Warden. I just have 2 more slides, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, and then we'll take questions for any of the 3 of you. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry to talk over you. So there's a number of other changes described in the report. We won't go through them in any great detail. Just flagging a few. The province is updating their projection methodology guidelines. So this is predominantly the guideline that would impact things like the county's recently completed growth management strategy. We have reached out to Hempson, who did that study for us, just to see if there's any impacts on the county's recently completed studies. There's some things that are definitely positive changes in terms of the province is looking at more and more electronic submissions available to approval authorities. So we fully support that in that regard. There are some changes that are going to impact municipalities, and these are picking up on past changes around parkland dedication requirements and the ability for, or the requirement for municipalities to have to accept parklands that are already encumbered, and allowing for appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal on parkland matters. So when speaking with municipal staff on this, there were a few things in there that they thought were decent in terms of there was some criteria on what types of land can be considered for parkland. And generally there was a lot of nodding heads on what could be considered there. But some of the encumbrances, the legal agreements that would come with that, as well as the appeals, certainly could have an impact on municipal planning and parkland processes in that regard. The province is also looking at exempting non-profit retirement homes from the payment of development charges. This is something that was generally supported. We don't see a lot of non-profit retirement homes, but certainly with our aging population, it is something that we likely need more of in that regard. And then finally, they're also looking at enhanced monitoring of minister zoning orders, existing minister zoning orders, and potentially amending or recalling some of those minister zoning orders. So in Grey County, the only two that were on that list were two in the township of Southgate. County staff would note that in both those cases, the developer is working through planning applications on those. So they are looking to move forward. And particularly in one of the minister zoning order, it also impacts the township of Southgate's new access onto Highway 10 and the bypass road into their eco parkway in that regard. So certainly we see merit in these existing minister zoning orders continuing to proceed in that regard. With respect to some final comments, and we might have made these exact same comments last go around when there was major legislative changes. The county, staff and council want to be a partner with the province in implementing changes that will benefit all Ontarians in the provincial economy. Certainly, we know there's county processes and municipal processes that we could stand to improve, and we want to work towards continuous improvement in helping implement provincial initiatives. The province, this government has made itself very clear that they'd like to see development proposals approved in a more efficient manner, and we want to be there at the table as partners in helping that happen. That said, the scale of change and the number of changes to planning, conservation authorities, development charges, through all these successive waves of legislative and regulatory changes has been a lot. I had a very experienced developer call me the other day, just to double check, what was in place and what wasn't, and what legislation affected his development and what didn't, and everything else. And he said, I used to be able to keep track of these things, but it just changes so quickly now. I'm having to pause projects to relearn everything. And so county staff are just suggesting that the county consider submitting comments here to say to the province, we'd respectfully request a bit of a pause on future changes, just to allow municipalities and counties the ability to implement the changes that have already been passed legislatively, and then to start to work with the province to monitor the efficacy of those changes, to really see where those further tweaks that might be needed to the system. But just with the changes coming so fast and furious, and particularly with the coming consolidation of conservation authorities, in some cases it can have the effect of actually slowing down development approvals, because everyone's working to adjust their systems and relearn legislative and regulatory tools. So we're just asking for a bit of a break to be able to catch up, if you will, and again monitor those changes. And so with that, my last slide was just the motion that the warden already read out. So I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back to you, Madam Warden, for any questions through council.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think we have to read that out a second time. Okay. So with that, then it is open if there are any questions or comments to be directed to any of the three directors involved. Okay, we'll begin with Councillor Dobreen.
Thank you, Warden, and thank you all of the departments that had to spend their time assessing yet another bill. And it's no wonder the planning department had deficit because they're spending all their time having to sift through all of these changes constantly in our local municipalities as well. I want to thank Scott for mentioning about snow removal and the inability or the placement of snow, because I think we can all speak to the number of calls that new residents have made to us over this past winter, surprised by the amount of snow and there's nowhere to put it. And that's on lots in the new developments that are probably twice or more the size of what 175 square meters. So the term one size does not fit all and take a rural lens to things seems to have been lost. I don't really have a question. I just appreciate the fact that it was captured. To the road standards, to Mr. Hoy, again, rural roads, the equipment that goes down our rural roads and bridges requires, a certain amount of finesse to accommodate the agricultural equipment in our rural streets and villages. So I mentioned to the deputy warden is maybe we should have a convoy go down to Queen's Park with all the agricultural equipment and just drive by, and just show that it wouldn't work in Toronto and Toronto streets won't work in rural Ontario. And I guess my final comment is to Savannah with regard to the transit fare. I know that SMART is concerned about the specialized transit and how the standardized fares and what could affect the ability to deliver that. I fashion that to, conservation authorities receive about, less than 3% from the province to fund the levy portion of, or delivering the service, but they have 100% of the say. So I'd like to see how this is all going to be funded in the grand scheme of things, because our property taxpayers can't support it.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Dobreen. Others, we'll go to Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Matrosoff. It's interesting seeing such an encompassing bill come forward where we're touching on so many different departments and trying to play catch up. The concept of the road standardization came up a few months back at either AMO or Roma, I can't remember which one. And a lot of what Director Hoy said today was my comments then to the staff, like to have mandatory hot mix asphalt doesn't make sense to me when you go from Windsor, which will have a significantly less ebb and flow of freeze and thaw winters than, Timmins will have, but we're all in Ontario and we're saying, here's your standard. So it is frustrating when the province tries to do such broad ranging one size fits all. The one question I do have is for Director Taylor, if I may, and when it comes to the OP prescribed standards, my question is there any thought on staff side of a potential restriction to municipalities' ability to be more restrictive than the province? The province is dictating how an official plan is going to look, what is in it, the type of reports we can ask for. But at the same time, there are municipalities that are still currently, at least, allowed to be more restrictive. We just can't be less restrictive. And it seems to me like the further this province is going, the more our own individual voice is being eroded with a provincial standard that says, this is what we're doing, take it or leave it.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from staff? Director Taylor?
Through you, Madam Warden, if I might, thank you for your comments and question, Councillor Nielsen. Certainly, the province has made it clear through this and other changes they've been consulting on that they're looking for more standardization across the province, and both in official plans, in applications, they're even consulting on, should we all be using the same software and everything else in that regard. That's not part of these Bill 98 consultations, but there's further discussions going on. And so the current sort of framework is that the province sets the minimum standard. Municipalities are able to go beyond that minimum standard, provided they're not in conflict with what the province has set. And so, there's always a bit of a judgment to apply, what does it mean to be in conflict with versus when are we just, being more restrictive at our own community. And so the province hasn't announced any changes to that broad framework, but just based on the level of standardization they seem to be seeking through these official plan changes and some of the other processes, I would hesitate to say that they're looking for municipalities and counties to maybe toe the line a little bit more than in previous provincial governments or previous provincial legislative changes. But they haven't said that municipalities can't add in more detail in that regard. But that's just sort of my own reading of the scenario, if you will.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I think it is encouraging that the process with MZOs are going through more of a planning process. I think that's a positive thing because I know myself and our council was sort of pressed up against that idea of using that as well, and that subdivision if they want it. But I guess my other question is, does that mean they're going to have to tear McDonald's down?
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions or comments? Looking around the room, looking online. Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions, so I think you've sufficed to provide us with all the information that we need. Thank you very much, Director Taylor, Director Myers, and Director Hoy. With that, then I will call the question. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, one more item before we return to the item that we had pulled from the consent agenda. And this item now is item 7E to follow along. It's recommended that report ITR CW 0226 be received and that staff proceed with the purchasing hosted infrastructure services from Stage 2 Data as a single source purchase totaling $175,700 excluding HST in 2026, plus a one-time implementation fee of $6,000. And that action be taken prior to County Council approval as per section 26.6B of the procedural bylaw. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Dobreen, seconded by Councillor Eccles. It's now on the floor for discussion, and welcome Director McEachern.
Thank you, Madam Warden and members of council. So over the past several months, I suppose I've talked a lot about Grey County's data center and our server infrastructure. A little more than a year ago, it was in the context of price increases for maintaining our on-premise infrastructure and getting that renewed for another year as we created a strategy on where we wanted to go with it. And more recently, I brought our cloud strategy to council and presented what we were thinking there. I would like to give just a couple of high level points from those reports, just as background. So typically we plan on a 5-year recycle or lifespan for this equipment. That is driven in large part by the speed at which technology changes, but also communication from the vendor that that's how long they intend to support it. So typically when we're buying new infrastructure, it's because it's not getting updates or because the vendor doesn't want to relicense it. In this case, we have had extensions to our server hardware and we've kept it for 8 years. Our capital budgets have, up until last year's budget, reflected our intention to replace this equipment with similar, essentially getting the latest version, the latest upgrades, and new equipment. Up until recently, when we compared using cloud-hosted infrastructure, so infrastructure that belongs to somebody else and you pay to use their environment and just connect to it, we found that they were prohibitively expensive, or certainly more than hosting your own or managing your own on-site. There are benefits to using cloud-hosted infrastructure in terms of somebody else is doing the installs, the upgrades, any break fix, they're the after hours call support for the most part if something goes down. But even bringing that, comparing it to how we manage our own infrastructure, it was more costly. Over the past several years, however, the price of hardware and infrastructure has gone up and they are broadly comparable now. So given that, we reassessed cloud infrastructure. And then when we developed our cloud strategy, it was all about developing the direction where we wanted the county's IT to go. and defining some guidelines that would help us choose technology that would give us the most benefit. Again, at a high level, what we were looking for were Canadian data residency for anything we were using that was critical. We were looking to get services that could provide more reliability and a better uptime than we can achieve managing our own data center. We certainly didn't want to compromise on any of the cybersecurity controls that we have with our own hardware and our own staff. And we really wanted to get a predictable financial model. So some services you pay for what you use, you can scale up and scale down based on how much it's being used, or something like a web server where you have a lot more traffic, you might have a lot more use. So we just wanted to make sure that if we were planning year-over-year budgets and what we intended to use, that we knew with a high degree of accuracy what those costs are going to be. And finally, we wanted to make sure that we were seeing a contract that wasn't prohibitive if we wanted to change to a different vendor down the road. And so that would be costs to get your data out of those services. It would be multiple contracts that have staggered duration, so it's really hard to break it up and get your data back out. So when we started planning for the infrastructure replacement, we were doing a lot of planning since last year. We looked really closely at what's available in the Canadian market. Each of the big three companies have cloud footprints in what they call public clouds. So that's Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. They all have a Canadian presence. But there's also a lot of companies that are still large, though smaller than them, where you're basically doing sort of private sales one-to-one. So we were assessing companies that, again, can offer Canadian data residency to ensure county data stay here, both for primary data center and for geographically separated backup. So if anything bad happens to your data center, you can have it running in another location that's probably not affected. The other thing we were looking for was ensuring that whatever we purchased was using the same technology, so our staff would be familiar with it. That way we wouldn't have to worry about large learning curves. We wouldn't have to risk mistakes when we're setting our things up in that environment. There's a high degree of comfort, and then again, we're not taking risks with cybersecurity because we have a high degree of confidence in what it is we're looking to use. So we have found a company in our research that is available through OECM, the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace. I've talked about that before. So products and services sourced for the broader Ontario public sector. The company that we are looking to work with is Canadian owned. They're called Stage 2 Data, as is indicated in the report. They're hosting environments in Toronto and Vancouver. They are using the same software that we are using, and from the information that's available to us, they are competitively priced, and indeed they have responded to a competitive process with OECM. The issue we're encountering is that Stage 2 Data services through OECM are not sold by them, they're resold through another vendor. Agreements with OECM are largely templated. You will have a master agreement, both the buyer, the county in this case, and the seller will have a master agreement with OECM, and then the county and then the sellers would have a customer supply agreement or a CSA. That is largely templated. It's canned language by OECM. There's not a lot of room for negotiation. The CSA would also include the specific terms and condition of what is being purchased. In this case, it is the specific services, the technology, how much of it, the duration of the contract, and things that are specific to technology, such as what is the uptime? If something breaks, how do you report it? What's the escalation procedures? So despite starting the negotiations in December, the county and the OECM vendor have not been able to reach terms that are mutually agreeable. This includes not just the specific terms and conditions of the CSA, which is templated. It includes that. It's not just the specific terms and conditions, but the CSA, which should be templated. There's not a lot of room to negotiate on that at all. The county has reviewed the specific terms and conditions that Stage 2 Data has behind their products, which is the same that is what we're negotiating on in OECM, and both Stage 2 Data and the county are in agreement on those terms. Their proposal is within the county's 2026 budget, which is $175,700 in 2026. So delays in resolving this contract have added risk to the county IT department's project portfolio. We do have a lot of infrastructure projects this year and we're already delayed. If we haven't completed this project and migrated to the new environment by July, then we're back into the situation that I reported on last summer, where we're looking at $60,000 thereabouts to relicense the on-premise infrastructure, which again is what we are trying to replace because it's beyond its lifespan. Stage 2 Data is willing to provide the same services at the same price as the current OECM agreement and at terms that both parties agree to. And as I stated, just to reiterate, even under the OECM agreement, it is Stage 2 Data that is providing the services to the county. So in order to kind of get this project back on track and keep all of our other projects online, we are seeking county approval to seek single source procurement with Stage 2 Data. That is all.
Okay, thank you. So put it out to committee of the whole members, if they have any questions. Looking around the room, not seeing hands go up. Looks like you provided us with the information that we need, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much, Director McEachern. Okay, so we will now take a return to item 6F. It's recommended that the AOR's request for provincial legislation amendments, unsafe working conditions for Oro-Medonte and East Oro-Tavistock. It's recommended that the correspondence received from AOR's Township of Oro-Medonte and East Oro-Tavistock regarding a request for provincial legislation amendments to improve the health and safety of municipal workers, including unsafe working conditions caused by interference, harassment, and dangerous actions towards municipal staff be supported by the County of Grey, and that this letter of support be sent to AMO for advocacy. So I'll need a mover and a seconder. So I've got it moved by Councillor Carleton, seconded by Councillor McKay. It's now on the floor for discussion. Councillor Carleton, you had requested that we pull this, so I'll look to you first.
Thank you, Warden. You will each have had one of these on your desk this morning. This came from an event that I attended yesterday with Councillor McKay, Councillor Nielsen, and Councillor Eccles in Chesley. And the actual day of mourning is next Tuesday, April 28th, and it's held each year to remember and honor workers who have been injured on the job or worse, in some cases killed on the job. And I understand that Hanover is having a special ceremony next week, and Georgian Bluffs is as well. The reason for pulling this is this event has been to continue to emphasize the need to be proactive in protecting all workers on the job. And the Association of Ontario Road Supervisors are asking municipalities to support their request to the Honourable David Piccini with the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. And the request is for provincial legislation amendments that are based on health and safety concerns for staff working in our municipalities who are more frequently being faced with abusive and aggressive behavior from members of the public. This can affect our roads crews, our bylaw enforcement, our building officials, staff in the front office, anyone who works directly with the public or in the public, and they are impacted by this inappropriate behavior. So Council in Georgian Bluffs has already provided support for this. I would ask that Grey County also support this request, and for member municipalities to maybe take it back to their own council table if they haven't already. And just as a proactive way of ensuring that all employees of Grey County don't just have a safe place to work, but are able to go home safely at the end of every day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, CEO, did you want to speak at all to the motion?
Thank you, Warden, and thank you for those comments, Councillor Carleton. And that's why staff, when we saw the correspondence come through from AORs, we were recommending support for the correspondence. Unfortunately, some of our workers have seen incidents over those years and have seen escalation in terms of just folks just not being patient when there's things like construction projects going on or when there's situations where there's winter maintenance involved. So anything that we can do to, again, protect the health and safety of our staff. It's something that I support and would hope to see the support from council. So that's why we recommended that this be supported.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Carlton, for taking the time to increase the public awareness about what this is about. Thank you very much. And I don't see, Councillor Gregg, go ahead.
Thank you. I would just note the day of mournings went on for a very long time, and it encompasses all workers, and everyone should have the ability and the right to be able to return home at the end of the workday without injury, without severe injury or death. That's fundamentally, we would all agree on that, and that's what we all pursue. When I first saw this at our council, I did read off a couple of these items that were acknowledged in the AOR's examples. An individual throwing a large chunk of ice at an active piece of municipal equipment while operating, a resident threatening to kill a sidewalk plow operator, man climbing onto a snowplow and refusing to get off until the operator agreed to plow his road next. A voicemail left by a resident threatening to shoot a municipal plow driver with a shotgun. These are criminal acts. We have legislation already in place to proceed with in recognizing these types of concerns. I don't think a lack of legislation is the preeminent problem in front of society right now. We've got more legislation than we ever have. So I don't agree with this is criminal. Treat it as it currently exists and prosecute for the actions. I don't think we need to pursue further we just went through an hour ago about more legislation coming from Queen's Park. It's driving us nuts. And I'm not so sure it's fixing the problem. So I think it should be received for information. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. We already have the mechanisms in place to respond. It's an enforcement issue, and we need to ensure that the enforcement is there to enhance and guarantee the safety of not just all of our municipal workers here, but all workers. My son's been on the 401 working and drilling and has seen these egregious actions by people. But as a former governor of Minnesota stated once, you can't legislate against stupidity. And that's what my concern is here. Just enforce and protect the people with the tools that are already in place.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, we'll go to Councillor McQueen and then to Councillor Carlton.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and good discussion. I think it's just in the general workplace, especially for new workers, it's training. How many times have people had an accident that they haven't been proper trained? Now, going to what you were saying, Councillor Gregg, with regards to dealing with the public, there's probably proper training there as well, and how to deal with that as well. But lack of training is one recipe for accidents or other things. So it's so important. I know under the all the different acts, proper training is led, even on the farm. We have people on the farm and that, but dealing with the public is one more step. But training and how to deal with that is so important as well. And I'm sure everybody, but the people say, well, more training, but it's there for a reason.
Thank you. And the refresher of training too, because the statistics are also out there too, that often more injuries occur from people who have been working in a role for a long time. So to make sure that you always circle back to it as well. Councillor Carlton.
Thank you. And I would agree that there is legislation in place if something is a criminal act. But I think there is the mental impact on staff when they take verbal abuse, and that is not legislated. It happens, and we need to have something in place further to protect their mental health, prevent PTSD. There's so much more that needs to go into this than just charging somebody for an illegal act. I think there's a lot more to this that needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. All right, then I will call the question. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kentner.
Thank you, Warden Matrosov. I just think it isn't quite right when the police decide what they will process, what law they will enforce and what law they're not going to enforce. If we just leave it as it is, we're doing nothing. And I think that we have to make it clear that if nothing else, the police have to enforce the laws that are there and shouldn't be in a position to pick and choose which ones they're going to act on.
Thank you. All right, no further hands. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Okay, thank you. So we will now then move on to, that takes care of everything except for the item that is in correlation with the closed session matter. So CAO is going to introduce the topic and then we will work our way through the process between open and closed session.
Thank you, Warden. So on February 12th, 2026, County Council will recall receiving a report outlining the background and timelines for the application process for the appointment of Board of Health members. Throughout 2025, steps were taken by the province, the Board of Health, as well as Bruce County and Grey County to establish a skills-based matrix that would be used to appoint board members. The matrix includes skills in a number of areas, including things like ethics and integrity, community engagement and responsiveness, strategic thinking and change management, risk management, public health knowledge, finance and budget oversight, to name just a few. At the meeting held on February 12th, motions were passed which had the effect of resetting the appointments and directed staff to start the application process for appointment of municipal members using the skills-based matrix. Following direction from council, the application period was opened up to Grey County Council members. Applicant information has been initially compiled into a closed session package for council's review prior to appointing members in open session. As per previous information from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, board members do not need to have all the skills outlined in the matrix. The hope is that the board will collectively have all the competencies, and it's our understanding that additional training opportunities will also be provided to the board members. In terms of legislative requirements, the Health Protection and Promotion Act establishes boards of health and sets out the general framework for the priorities of the board. Ontario Reg 55990 establishes the Board of Health of Grey Bruce Health Unit shall have 7 municipal members, 4 of which are to be appointed by this council. It's now recommended that Committee of the Whole now go into closed session to discuss legal considerations associated with the appointment process prior to appointing the members in open session.
Okay, thank you. So then once we go into closed session and come back out, then we'll return to the motion that's listed in the agenda as item 7F. So that means that we will go into item 8. It's recommended that the Committee of the Whole does now go into closed session pursuant to section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regards to Board of Health appointments, and number 2, labor relations or employee negotiations, which is regarding OPSU. May I ask for a mover? And okay, got a move by Councillor Dickert, seconded by Councillor McQueen. All those in favor? Okay, we will switch it to closed. Take a break now. Good idea if you need a 5-minute break, but we are, as soon as the room is cleared and we're set up, we'll go into closed. Okay, so I can report that we have come out of closed session and that the Committee of the Whole proceeded into closed session to discuss advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose and labor relations or employee negotiations. No votes were taken during this session. Okay, so with that, then we're going to return then to item 7F, and there is a recommended report. There is a recommended motion on the that has been published on the agenda that we receive the report and appoint 4 members. Now, I will just first put the question out, having as council Committee of the Whole members have had a chance to review all the applications. I will put the question out with all those who did submit applications if you are still willing to stand for appointment. Councillor Dickert.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and I'm very pleased to see that there is a full list of candidates there. And considering I already serve on 3 committees here in the county and 3 committees back in my home of Hanover, I would prefer to withdraw my name at this point in time.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Dickert. And seeing no further hands, we are ready to move forward then. CAO, do you want to come back and let us know if you've completed everything you'd like to describe before I look for a mover and a seconder with the 4 names inserted into the motion?
Great, thank you, Warden. And so with Councillor Dickert's withdrawing his application, there will then be 4 remaining applicants. That would be Councillor Gregg, Councillor Nielsen, Councillor DeBreen, and Councillor Keaveney. And we'd be looking for then a motion to support the appointments of those 4 members to the Board of Health as per the skills-based matrix.
Okay, so with those 4 names in place, I'll just put the question to Councillor Nielsen, Keaveney, Dobreen, and Gregg. You're willing to stand? I'm not seeing any objections. Okay, and the clerk is also, this harkens back to a little bit of history. The clerk is also adding to the motion that I'll look for a mover and a seconder. And that, so the motion will read that the staff report CAOR CW 1326 regarding appointments to the Board of Health be received, and that the following 4 members be appointed to the Board of Health for the remainder of the 2022-2026 term. Councillors Nielsen, Keaveney, Dobreen, and Gregg, and that the previous motion appointing the warden as a 4th member of the Health Board be rescinded. These 4 individuals are not the warden, and I will continue in a role in which I will be able to represent the county along with Warden Charbonneau of Bruce County to represent the county without having to hang our hands up, our warden hats up in order to sit on the board, so that we can continue to work in partnership with the province as the 2 counties that fulfill the funding requisites for the Board of Health. So I'm happy to continue in that role, and I'm my thanks to those who have put their names forth for this particular motion. So with that, I will look for a mover and a seconder. Oh, well, okay, I got to choose. We'll take the Deputy Warden moving and Councillor Eccles seconding. It's now on the floor for any discussion. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. And again, on behalf of all the council, we appreciate those who are willing to put their names forth. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Most appreciated as we walk through this process. All right, now we do have one more item. Just a moment. Okay, so coming up to other business and notices of motion, I just need to check. Councillor Dobreen, is it a notice of motion that you're going to bring forward or an other business item in terms of your nomination for AMO? We just need to know, but in terms of the timing, because if the timing is tight, we should address it in other business. If it's not, we can do it as a notice of motion. Okay. All right. In which case then I'll put a call out for any other business. Councillor McQueen.
Just quickly, the call came out for delegations for AMO. I don't know if there's any thoughts there, maybe next meeting or whatever. I don't know.
Through you, Warden, yes, we'll be bringing forward a list of recommended delegations, again, based on previous discussions with this council, based on discussions we've had with senior manager team as well as external partners and member municipalities. So we're copying a list as we speak, and we'll be bringing that forward to the May 14th committee of the whole meeting for consideration.
Okay, any other business? No. Okay, notices motion. Councillor Dobreen.
Thank you, Warden Matrosovs, and to County Council. I'll be bringing a notice of motion to the next meeting, seeking Council's re-endorsement of my nomination for election to the AMO County Caucus, which will be held at the AMO conference in August 2026.
Okay, thank you. Any other notices of motion? Okay. Seeing none then, it looks like we're ready to adjourn. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Moved by Counselor McKay, seconded by Counselor McQueen. All those in favor? And this committee of the whole is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.